Donald J. Trump will become the 47th president of the United States.
This is a special bonus episode of Squawk Pod from CNBC. We're bringing you over 2 hours of our 2025 inauguration coverage. Becky Quick is in Washington, D.C. with a litany of guests, investors, Washington insiders, and CEOs like Pfizer's Albert Bourla on the realistic hurdles ahead and the opportunity.
But there are things that Kennedy says that we can work with, and I don't see why we wouldn't be able to create together something on cancer, for example.
The business angles you need to know as Donald Trump takes office as the 47th president of the United States. Investor Stanley Druckenmiller joins us.
CEOs are somewhere between relieved and giddy. We're a believer in animal spirits.
And the executive orders we can expect after he's sworn in, with special reporting from CNBC's Eamon Javers.
We watch the pageantry, the parades, the celebration today. There is substance on the line, and there is an underlying tension here.
I'm CNBC producer Cameron Costa. It's January 20th, 2025, and Squawk Pod's special bonus episode of the inauguration of Donald J. Trump begins right now.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to CNBC's special coverage of the inauguration of Donald J. Trump. I'm Becky Quick, live from Washington, D.C. Over the next several hours, we will show you the transition of power from President Biden to President Trump. We have a huge lineup of guests joining us today, including the CEO of Pfizer, legendary investor Stan Druckenmiller, Carlyle's David Rubenstein, and Elon Musk's biographer, Walter Isaacson. We're going to look at this from every angle, what it means for you and your money. CNBC's reporters will bring you in-depth coverage of these policies of the incoming administration that matter most for your money. Steve Liesman and Robert Frank are going to be joining us later from CNBC's headquarters. But right now, Emily Wilkins and Megan Casella are posted around the Capitol today. Steve Kovac is live at CNBC headquarters, and Eamon Javers is right here with us on set. And Eamon, we want to start with you on what is the coldest inauguration day in 40 years.
Good morning, Becky. Welcome to Washington. So great to have you here. It is a fascinating day today. It is bitterly cold out there, so they've moved everything inside. All of the pageantry and pomp and circumstance that we expected from today will all take place in a little bit of a more confined space inside the Capitol Rotunda. We're going to see history, we're going to see celebration, and we're also going to see substance today, Becky. Unlike a lot of inauguration days, we're going to see some actual policy movement. And illustrating the tension, I think, of this particular inauguration and transition of power from Biden to Trump is the fact that Joe Biden, just within the past hour, has issued preemptive pardons to a number of people who were involved in his administration in various ways. Take a look at this list of who the president, who is outgoing in just a couple of hours, has issued pardons to: General Mark Milley, Dr. Anthony Fauci, members of Congress and staff who served on the January 6th committee, U.S. Capitol and D.C. Metropolitan police officers who testified before the January 6th committee. All of those have been issued pardons by the outgoing president this morning for presumably any conduct that they may have engaged in during their service to the country. Biden issuing a statement just a short time ago saying that none of that should be taken to indicate that these people committed any wrongdoing or were guilty of anything at all, simply saying that these are preemptive pardons in order to clear the deck so that those people don't have to worry about retaliation from the incoming Trump team. So as we watch the pageantry, the parades, the celebration today, there is substance on the line, and there is an underlying tension here between the transition from Joe Biden to Donald Trump.
Late yesterday afternoon, Donald Trump, at the rally that he held at the Capital One Arena here, was talking about how he plans on day one today to go ahead and pardon most of the January 6th. At least he hinted at that very heavily. He said he thought it would be something that most of the people, 99.9% of the people in that arena, would agree with. I think he called them January 6 hostages as he was going through with this. But you're right, there has been a lot of acrimony back and forth and thoughts of what comes next. I think when he was laying it out to NBC's Kristen Welker just a few days ago, Donald Trump, he said that he's going to be looking at messages of unity, strength, and also fairness. And that fairness comes with, I think, some retribution for what he sees as very unfair treatment over the last 4 years.
Yeah, and as you watch that tension, we're going to see Donald Trump and Joe Biden together several times during the course of the day at the White House, and then in the motorcade on the way over to the Capitol for the swearing in. So you can imagine what it'd be like to be a fly on the wall for those behind the scenes moments between the two men as they're issuing these dueling sets of pardons that we expect to see today. And you look at all of the tension between those two sides, and you do think that as President Trump considers how he's going to handle the January 6th pardons, he's got a couple of buckets to look at, right? One is people who've already been prosecuted, served their time, or weren't sentenced to any time. Those people can be pardoned relatively easily. It doesn't affect their lives other than clearing their record. Then there's another bucket of people who will be more controversial, people who are convicted of crimes, including assault, physical assault on police officers. We'll see how far Donald Trump decides to go today. We do expect to see those pardons later in the morning, or later in the afternoon, I should say, after he's sworn in. And we'll see how much emphasis he puts on those January 6th pardons. But we're seeing this fascinating set now of dueling pardons by the outgoing and incoming administrations. And I think that just underscores the tension and drama in all of this. And I think what we should say, though, is that even as you have that tension, we are seeing here a peaceful transfer of power.
Yeah, and you will see past presidents who are here. And by the way, they've all been in close proximity recently for the funeral of former President Jimmy Carter. And you also saw actually some pretty genial time between the current President Biden and incoming President Trump right after the election day when he welcomed to the White House, too.
And amazing moments at that funeral of Barack Obama sitting next to Donald Trump, laughing and joking in conversation. And we'll be watching all that body language today. So fascinating to see these presidents interact with one another. George W. Bush, who famously called Donald Trump's first inaugural address weird with an expletive.
Weird excrement, I think is what he called it.
We'll see whether he renders a judgment this time around as well. And then, of course, all the CEOs who are going to be there. Elon Musk and the tech CEOs. So much body language to watch. We've never seen anything like this.
Never seen this many business leaders here, and that's why it makes it such an important story for us as well. We're going to talk about all of these issues as we go through the morning. Eamon, stick around. Right now, we want to go over to Emily Wilkins. She's standing by at the Russell Rotunda. Emily, good morning.
Good morning, Becky. Well, yeah, today is going to be a very historic day, obviously with the inaugural, but also the fact that the inaugural is being held inside. I mean, Capitol staffers, they worked for months to erect outside the bleachers an entire ceremony that was going to fit about 1,600 people. Now that all has to be moved inside into the rotunda. I mean, it's a beautiful space to be holding any sort of ceremony like this, but it fits significantly less people. We're thinking of somewhere between 600 to 700 folks are going to be squeezed in there, which means that folks will be getting cut from the guest list. But of course, this was a decision made by Trump to make sure that they are avoiding some of the cold temperatures that D.C. is experiencing today. You also are going to see about another 2,000 folks go into the Capitol into Emancipation Hall. That's a bit of a wider space. They won't be in the room for when Trump is inaugurated, but what they will get to see is everything going on live, and then Trump is expected to go and address that group before heading off to the Capital One Arena. We'll be keeping a close eye on what lawmakers made the cutoff for being inside the room where it happens today in the rotunda. Certainly, we're expecting to see Speaker Mike Johnson as well as Senate Majority Leader John Thune there. Both of them have really bonded with Trump over the last couple of weeks since the election. You saw them go to UFC fights. You saw them take planes. You saw them show up with football games. And it really shows that this time around, Trump has a much warmer relationship with Congress. He's got a Congress that really wants to back him and support him. A lot of lawmakers that have come in since his first term, they're sort of more aligned with the Maga movement, if you will, and with Trump's sort of outlook on how things need to be done. That's not to say, though, that everything is going to be smooth sailing. We saw this just in December when it came to the government shutdown and Trump backing a bill that 38 Republicans then turned around and voted against because of their concerns over the debt limit. So one thing to keep an eye on really for the next 2 years is going to be those fiscal hawks, both in the House and in the Senate. They could really, just a few of them, could stymie some of Trump's major legislation. And because of the process that they're doing this special process that allows them to move forward with just 50 votes in the Senate, it does mean that they're going to have to kind of say up front, hey, this is the amount that we want to spend, and here's what the pay-fors are going to be. So that could set up some very difficult votes. And we'll have to see if, like for Speaker Mike Johnson's getting elected speaker, if Trump needs to come in at the final hour and really put the pressure on some lawmakers to go along with the plans. Stephen Miller also briefed a number of top Republicans yesterday on what the White House is expecting to do today and in the first couple days in terms of executive orders. And I've had lawmakers told me that they're looking at those executive orders closely. You know, executive orders, they don't have a ton of power. Congress wants to find a way to put those into law. Becky?
All right, Emily, thank you very much. We will check back in with you in just a little bit. Right now, we want to get over to Megan Casella. She is actually braving the cold this morning, overlooking the Capitol building. Megan, good morning.
Becky, good morning. It is not so bad up here, if you would believe it. A beautiful view up here as we get ready. But I wanted to get into some of the substance that we're expecting today. Emily just mentioned that Stephen Miller briefed some Republican lawmakers late last night. He's a top policy advisor to Donald Trump, and he started talking about the executive orders that we're expecting today. And we're expecting these to come in three main buckets. It's energy, it's immigration and the border, and it's government reform or DOGE. So running through these just a little bit, on the energy front, we are expecting Donald Trump today to sign some orders canceling the EV mandate, ending some electric vehicle tax credits that were put in place under the Biden administration. He, of course, has talked for several months now about drilling for more oil. He wants to streamline the permitting process, and he'll declare a national energy emergency. All of this, he says, will create jobs, lower prices for American consumers, help the stock market in the meantime, and make us less dependent on some adversaries who we depend on now for some oil. On the immigration front, this is expected to be a huge bucket today. Trump, of course, has talked about mass deportations. We think there could be some mass raids today and throughout the week, potentially starting tomorrow in cities across the country. He's talking about ending birthright citizenship that is, of course, established under the 14th Amendment, but Trump's policy advisors are looking at ways to try to challenge that, potentially inviting some legal challenges, but deciding that that could be the best way forward to try to end birthright citizenship. And he also wants to end Biden-era border policies, send more troops to the border, and all of that. And then finally, we're expecting some movement on the government reform side. One order potentially just establishing DOGE, that Department of Government Efficiency, and making it legitimate, at least as legitimate as an executive order could do. They're also talking about ending telework for federal employees, rescinding some diversity initiatives. So all of that, Becky, we do expect to get more information later today and more details. But I do want to flag just one thing that I didn't mention, and that's trade, because we haven't heard any specifics yet from the Trump team about what exactly is coming today on that front. That could change over the next several hours. We have questions out to these folks, but right now we know there are some divisions still within the Trump team on the trade and tariffs front. So while they're likely to do something, we just don't know yet what exactly that will be. Becky?
Megan, thank you. We will see you in just a little bit. Right now, we want to get over to Steve Kovac. He's covering the big tech angle from CNBC headquarters. And Steve, we've really never seen anything like this in terms of tech leaders being represented at an inauguration like this.
Yeah, that's right, Becky. And it all plays into that activity we saw over the weekend with the TikTok ban and its removal and return to service over the weekend. So let me tell you where things stand now. The service came back online yesterday after Trump posted on Truth Social he would not enforce the ban and work to facilitate a sale of the company. In the meantime, Apple and Google, they're still keeping ByteDance apps out of their app stores in order to comply with the law that went into effect yesterday. Unclear, though, if they're going to bring the apps back to the stores based on just a social media post from the president-elect. And while President Trump encouraged Apple and Google to bring the apps back, Senators Tom Cotton and Pete Ricketts with the statement yesterday saying the exact opposite, encouraging Apple and Google not to back down until ByteDance is sold, and warned violating the law risks heavy fines and bankruptcy. But two tech companies appear to be ignoring that. That's Oracle and Akamai, which provide cloud services to keep TikTok running here in the United States. Last night at a rally, Trump floated the idea that the United States could acquire half of TikTok and then facilitate a sale. We're expecting more clarity on this as soon as today from an executive order. And of course, all of this is happening, Becky, as tech billionaires and other Silicon Valley elite attend Trump's inauguration today with agendas of their own. Let's call them the Maga 7. Many of them represent the magnificent 7 companies we talk about so much. So here's who we're going to see and what's at stake for each in this new Trump administration. There's Tim Cook, of course, the Apple CEO. They need to avoid China tariffs. And at yesterday's Trump rally, he said he spoke with Tim Cook and promised Apple would make a big investment in the United States. No comment from Apple on that. Sundar Pichai, the Alphabet CEO, lost the DOJ search antitrust case last year and now working remedies through the courts, which could include breaking up the company. And then there's Jeff Bezos, former Amazon CEO. He needs support for his space company, Blue Origin, which competes with Elon Musk's SpaceX. And finally, the two have embraced Trump more than the others. Mark Zuckerberg Zuckerberg, the Meta CEO, recently he eliminated DEI policies at his company, told Joe Rogan that Meta needs that more masculine energy, and ended fact-checking programs and removed safeguards that slowed down the flow of misinformation across Meta's platforms. Also, he'll be hosting a reception tonight with GOP mega donors Miriam Adelson and Todd Ricketts and Rocket's owner Tillman Fertitta. Meta's also facing its own antitrust charges from the United States, and Zuckerberg appears to want Trump's help pressuring the European Union over strict tech laws, forcing Meta to more strictly moderate content on its platforms. As for Elon Musk, I don't need to tell you much over here. So he spent over $270 million to get Trump reelected. He will run that Doge with Vivek Ramaswamy, though there are some rumors that Vivek may be out of that group. He will be in charge of cutting costs at the same agencies that regulate his companies, from the FAA for SpaceX to NHTSA for Tesla. And now there are two Mag 7 exceptions, though, not appearing today. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang, NVIDIA tells us he's in China today on a business trip. And then questions around Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella. Microsoft won't say if he'll be there. We're expecting to see him in Davos as soon as tomorrow. But he did meet with Trump at Mar-a-Lago a few days ago. And like the others, Microsoft donated $1 million to the inauguration fund. Becky.
All right, Steve, thank you. We've got lots to talk about with you today, and we will continue to watch this. We're also awaiting many of the pictures that we've been we're here for today with the inauguration, with the pomp and circumstance. St. John's Church service is going to be taking place at 8:30, and we are expecting incoming President-elect Donald Trump, to be leaving the Blair House at any moment, to be headed on his way over to the services that will be held at St. John's. We've already seen some Trump family members who have made their way into St. John's Church for that service that begins at 8:30.
You know, Becky, as we talk about the tech leaders and all the presence here in Washington this weekend and into today, and that TikTok action over the weekend, you start to see some of the divisions within the MAGA movement, which has been so tremendously successful in American politics. But you saw that tweet from Tom Cotton over the weekend suggesting that actually the law is the law
when it comes to TikTok.
Yeah. And therefore TikTok needs to be shut down because Congress passed a law on an overwhelming bipartisan basis. The Supreme Court upheld it. Now you're seeing Donald Trump coming in and saying, well, wait a second. Let's see if we can issue an executive order. We're going to have to watch for the exact details of that executive order, because the legal ground here is really unclear in terms of whether Trump has the authority now to issue an executive order to basically amend a law that's already been passed retroactively.
And whether American companies would go along with this unless they are clear that they would not be threatened with any legal liability for continuing to allow TikTok to be there.
They have legal exposure themselves,
Senator Cotton has said the same thing.
You're seeing this movement, this split within the MAGA movement, some who want to be very hard line on TikTok in China, others who want to be a little bit looser on TikTok because of the political benefits that they see from it. So that's one sort of fraction point to look at within the MAGA movement.
As we count down to the inauguration of Donald Trump, we want to bring in Omid Malik. He is the founder of 1789 Capital. Omid, for those who aren't familiar, is also someone who has been a big Trump donor. He's employing Donald J. Trump Jr., and he's been a huge transition person who has helped bring some people like Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. He helped work on their endorsements for the Trump campaign. Omid, want to welcome you today and just ask what you're thinking on this historic morning.
Well, I can tell you I'm a little bit tired because I've been in D.C. since Thursday morning, and it feels like it's 3 weeks. But it's been an incredible experience to be here and just see the outpouring of support from, as your colleague was just saying, so many different groups from the United States that have come together to build this pretty magnificent coalition, actually.
I guess Eamon was kind of pointing to some of the potential stressors in that coalition. It's a coalition that's a tight coalition at the moment, but there are potential cracks. What do you see as somebody who kind of moves back and forth between many of these factions?
I think to a certain extent that's correct, because so many of the, factions, if you will, that comprise that coalition were not present, first time around in 2016, including myself, frankly. But I think that strengthens it. And as we work together, we're going to encounter certain issues that are novel, particularly like the one you're referring to with TikTok. And we'll have to see where there are broad areas of engagement and try to work on the specifics, which is, I think, what this issue will be showing as well.
I mean, let's talk about the situation with TikTok. It's a situation where President Trump himself was not always a fan of TikTok. He was not in favor of it being allowed to stick around at first. He changed his mind over the course of the campaign. And look, in all honesty, there are a lot of young people in particular in this nation that are reliant on it. There are businesses that make money off of this. And that's something that he stressed yesterday at his rally at the Capital One Arena. How do you see this playing out? Because straight on the face of it, the law is not on his side. He can't overturn it with an executive order.
One clarification there, I think that they may argue, again, I don't know if this is the case, there was some provision about a 90-day extension, which is
correct.
The number they're using too, which may be how they're going to try to argue that they have the ability to do this.
I think there had to be, the 90-day extension, I believe in the law, says that you have to have a buyer on the line, and if there's a buyer, that extension can take place so negotiations can continue.
Right. And is that buyer the United States government? The tweet wasn't clear. Right. So that's what I'm saying. And we don't know, right, what's exactly going on behind the scenes there, whether it's the U.S. government or a big player, existing tech incumbent. So my question there would be, have those conversations already continued? If they haven't, then I blame the Biden administration for allowing an app that has 170 million users to get to this point with no actual solution. I'm also very skeptical of TikTok and Chinese influence in the United States. I even penned an op-ed all the way back in 2020 calling for TikTok to be banned. Now, that said, nothing really practical was done after the legislation was passed. I think an interesting solution also that was indicated in the tweet was that there should be a local partner. Now, you guys know this, but I'm not sure how many people appreciate that in order to do business in China, you have to have a local partner where either the government or some local entity owns 50% of your U.S. company. And in many cases around social media, they don't allow any of our companies to operate there at all. So a bit of reciprocity is something I'm in favor of. So if the end result
the big
here,
question, though, big question would be who owns the algorithm and who controls the information of the people on the app. I think those may be the big questions. A partnership might work, but would that mean that the U.S. partner would be responsible for both the algorithm and the control of the information of the 170 million plus people on TikTok from the United States?
Let me be clear. That's exactly why I don't think we've had a deal yet, because without the algorithm, it's worthless. So just buying TikTok without that, you just have a name brand, but you don't actually have the power of it. And of course, the Chinese government and TikTok themselves have been remiss to allow that to be sold. So that's exactly what needs to be resolved. Yeah.
It's Eamon Javers here. You raised a fascinating question here, which is the idea of the United States becoming an owner of TikTok. And I've got so many questions about how that would be executed, because you're right. If the U.S. does buy a share of TikTok, then that would give President-elect Trump the out that he needs to say there is a buyer at the table. Therefore, we can grant this extension under the law that's passed. The question is, who's going to pay for that? Is that U.S. taxpayer dollars on the line to buy a big share of TikTok? Is that, in effect, a partial nationalization of TikTok, at least in a temporary basis, in order for that share to then be sold out to some American tech company?
That's exactly the hypothetical that I think would give them wiggle room under the law. Now, this is just me and you speculating, but I think that's how you would do it. And then you would broker a deal with a president who loves to make huge business deals. And again, I think that
there's some real questions about the practicality of that, though, right? Because where Congress has to appropriate funds. Where do the funds come from? How much money are the taxpayers on the hook for? And what happens if you can't resell it for the same value that you paid for it?
Right, precisely. But the other option is, of course, that there could have already been negotiations going on with bigger private buyers that we're not privy to, which would then also, I think, have triggered the extension as well. So I don't want to rule that out either. But it will all come down to Becky's question around the ownership of the algorithm. But I anticipate that that's going to have to be part of the deal that's already being worked on. You simply can't have that be held still with the Chinese and for you to think that you've had a victory there.
We want to thank you so much for calling in today. You've been a pivotal person in this coalition that's been built, and we hope to have many conversations with you down the road. But we do appreciate your time today and hope you have a great time.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks very much. You guys have a wonderful Inauguration Day.
Take care.
Thank you.
As we've been mentioning, President-elect Trump is going to be sworn in as the 47th president in just a few hours. We're watching the pictures leading up to that. But joining us right now is Jason Miller. He's with the Trump transition team. He's a senior advisor there. And Jason, if your ears were ringing, we were talking about you just in the last 10 minutes or so. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
So we were talking about you in the context of the many executive orders that are expected to be coming today. We've heard as many as 200 executive orders. What can you tell us about what we should be facing?
Yeah, so today is going to be a plan of action. It's going to be different from what we've seen with previous inaugurals, where typically incoming presidents have a bunch of empty rhetoric and promises that they're never going to get to. But with President Trump, this is only the second time in our nation's history that we have a president who's returning to office. So he knows exactly what he wants to do. He knows how he wants to improve people's lives, literally starting on day one. So as soon as he's sworn in at 12:01 p.m., he's going to start signing executive orders to secure the border. We talk about putting his policies back in place, such as remain in Mexico, ending catch and release, stopping this nonsense app that allows people to effectively come in illegally just with an app on their smartphone, deploying National Guard to the southern border. So we're going to see a lot of action and excitement around that, but also very important to many of your viewers right now, getting some of the energy production going again and open up some of this permitting. Obviously, we saw what Joe Biden did with shutting down some pipelines and other things. And so knowing that this economy has to be turned around, we have to get it improved. This is going to be really at the forefront for President Trump. And again, today is about a plan of action. He'll talk about this revolution of common sense, of putting his policies back in. And so it's going to be about very detailed, specific, a little bit more programmatic, but we can bring back that golden age of America, and it's going to start today.
We had just had a reporter on who had been hearing bits and pieces about the potential for ending birthright citizenship, which is part of the 14th Amendment. Is that an executive order that will be issued today?
Well, it's certainly something that President Trump has spoken about on the campaign trail. It's not something that I'm currently tracking as far as today, but then again, I haven't seen necessarily all of the executive orders. Between the executive orders and the executive actions, we're probably going to be in the neighborhood of somewhere right around 100. So it's going to be a lot. And like I said, right when President Trump is sworn in, he's going to start signing those. When he gets over to the Capital One Arena just a couple hours later, that'll be part of the program as well. So this is, again, we've never seen anything like what we're going to see today with this plan of action of him putting this really into motion. And so it's going to be a very energetic day. It's going to be an upbeat day. But I also want to make sure that people realize one thing. We have some real challenges that are facing our country. The last 4 years with Joe Biden has been a disaster. And so President Trump will lay out some of those things, some of the challenges that we're facing. But again, he has the solution. He has exactly what can be done to help you. That's the difference with today.
Jason, is there anything you can tell us about trade and tariffs, any executive orders that might be signed today that would implement some of the things that incoming President Trump has talked about?
Well, very early on, whether it's today or within the next few days, there are going to be a number of those principles that are laid out. The president has talked about trade and tariffs pretty extensively on the campaign trail. Some of those things will take a little bit more time than others, but I would say for initially today, the focus will be on the border and securing the border and starting to deport some of the criminal illegals that are here. By the way, we already have 1.3 million individuals in this country who are processed and ready to be deported. And so we're going to start there. Also, we know exactly where these gang members are, the Tren de Aragua and some of the multinational gangs that are around, but also with the energy production, that's the focus. But we are also going to go through and start uprooting completely some of the DEI and the wokeism that's infected our government. One other thing, too, there's going to be a clawback from tens of billions of dollars of this Green New Deal money that have been allocated. So we're going to stop that from being spent. Obviously, that helps spark and lead to much of the inflation that we saw in this country. And so we're going to get some common sense back in the White House and back in government.
According to DHS, there's about 425,000 illegal immigrants who have criminal records. I don't think the United States, or at least we very rarely have deported more than 400,000 people in any given year. The numbers that you're talking about, I mean, if you look, there's estimated, at least by Pew, about 8.3 undocumented migrants who are working here in this country at this point. I just wonder if you have an idea of the scope, the numbers that you anticipate, and how quickly that might happen.
Yeah, good question. The president isn't sworn in yet for another couple of hours, and so I don't want to get ahead of the president or Tom Homan and the rest of the administration folks are going to be putting that into action. But like I said, we have 1.3 million people here already approved and processed and ready to be sent back. And there are additional people who have not yet been processed, but they are transnational gang members, other violent criminals that we know exactly where they are. I would point out for people who are watching, 87% of Americans support what President Trump says with regarding deporting criminal illegals. 2/3 of Americans support President Trump's border policies overall, and even a majority of Latinos and Hispanics support what President Trump wants to do with the border and with immigration. So these are very popular proposals. I think it's a big part of the reason he won with such a mandate, 312 electoral votes, winning the popular vote, also getting 77.3 million votes, a record for a Republican. So this plan of action, it's coming right at you. It's going to happen. I think people are going to be happy because you know what? We're not going to have to wait around for months or years for things to happen. It's going to start happening today.
Yeah, Jason, no question that immigration and the issues at the border were a big part of President Trump's popularity and why he was reelected. The other part of that, though, was real concerns about inflation. And the more people that you deport, I don't think we're talking about the 425,000 people with criminal records, but if you are deporting more of the workers, does that in turn lead to higher inflation? And how do we battle that?
Well, I don't think it's going to. I mean, we saw from President Trump's first term when he exited, he only had a 1.4% inflation rate. Well, we also know, too, what really spiked the inflation under Joe Biden. Number one, they went and cut off a bunch of the energy production, reduced number of the permits, and destroyed a couple of the pipelines that were in development. But also, too, those two massive spending bills, those reckless spending bills, that's what sparked the inflation. But with President Trump coming back in, number one, he can start cutting a lot of the regulations right away. Of course, we're going to have the tax bill coming up. They're going to do the reconciliation vehicle. Not only do we have to re-up the Trump tax cuts, he has additional promises of no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security. That's why we're already seeing the optimism. You know this, I mean, this is CNBC, but we've already seen this spike in optimism from small business, from Main Street, but even from CEOs as well. The U.S. is open for business. We have the international CEOs coming in, the domestic CEOs. Everybody wants to invest in America. Everybody wants to be a part of what President Trump is doing. When the economy improves, it's going to get better for everybody.
Jason Miller from the Trump transition team. Jason, thank you for your time this morning.
Hey, thank you so much.
We still have a big lineup to come this morning, including the CEO of Pfizer, legendary investor Stan Druckenmiller, many others. CNBC's live coverage of the inauguration of Donald Trump continues after a quick break. Donald Trump's newly created cryptocurrency surged over the weekend. Robert Frank joins us this morning with more on that. Robert, good morning.
Good morning, Becky. Great to see you. Well, stock markets may be closed today, but the crypto markets are open, and the Trump family is indeed cashing in. Trump's net worth ballooning over the weekend thanks to that new token. It shot up to around $74 on Saturday, now settling down to around $50. The market cap of that meme token now at about $10 billion. Now, that is only for the 200 million tokens that are issued. There will be a total of 1 billion tokens that could be sold over the next year. So you've got only 20% currently in the market. The other 80% is currently held by Trump's company. Now, if they all sold at today's value, his meme wealth would be over $40 billion. Now, the Trumps have already made around $60 million in fees over the weekend just from all that trading. So separate from that, he's now worth about $7 billion. You got about $4.6 billion from Truth Social, that's DJT, that, and as well as the $2 to $2.5 billion from the Trump Organization. Now, Melania also cashing in on the crypto craze. Her meme coin, which launched yesterday, now has a market cap of over $2 billion. Eric Trump saying this is all part of a new and growing business sector, and Dollar Trump, that's the meme coin, is currently, quote, the hottest digital meme on earth, and this is just the beginning. Disclosures on the token's website state, quote, Trump memes are not intended to be an investment or security and is not political and has nothing to do with political campaigns or any political office or governmental agency. So, but clearly, Becky, this is the first time we've seen political power translate so quickly into crypto wealth.
Robert, there have been some in the industry, some crypto advocates who have been a little concerned about this move. They want to see more crypto regulation. They want to be brought into these arenas, but they're a little concerned by what they've seen just with the crossover from the administration and this new meme, this new
it was surprising to me that many of the crypto boosters over the weekend saying that they were worried about the effect of this, that these sort of meme coins tend to balloon up and then crash quite quickly. A lot of people could get hurt. In the end, this could damage the overall reputation of the industry, which, of course, has made such great progress over the past year with the value of Bitcoin, with ETFs, with the potential of sort of more friendly regulation. So I was interested to see how wary people were of this. But for now, the trading did come down off that high price, but it didn't fall as much as typical meme coins do.
That's right. It's hanging in there. And again, pretty rocket-like behavior in terms of the wealth factor that it's created overnight, literally. Robert, thank you. We're going to be talking to you throughout the day here, and we appreciate it. We'll see you in just a little bit. Right now, though, as we count down to the inauguration of Donald Trump, we want to dig into some of his priorities for Congress. Joining us right now is Tennessee Republican Senator Bill Hagerty. And Senator, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We know that this is an agenda that has some speed and some urgency behind it. What do you anticipate, not in the first 100 days maybe, but maybe in the first 100 hours?
Becky, I think speed and urgency may even be an understatement. If you think about it, President Trump's success has already begun before he's even taken office. I mean, look at the ceasefire agreement that took place in Israel. Thanks, Steve Witkoff, for flying over and conveying President Trump's messages and making that speed up and happen finally. If you think about what's happening around the world today, you see CEOs making commitments to capital investment here in America well before President Trump has taken office, but after the election. In fact, our GDP growth has been adjusted significantly upward for 2025. And we've already begun to see the impetus taking place right now for our economy. I think what you're going to see starting today, a tremendous number of executive orders coming out that will deal with very pressing issues. I think immigration and the border obviously are going to be a key concern. That was a big issue on the campaign trail. President Trump has made a commitment to resecure our nation again, starting with our southern border, and empower ICE to do their job again. That is a critical issue for Americans, and that's something I expect to see a lot of action on today. Getting back our energy industry to the growth trajectory that we were on. That's going to be great for our national security. It's going to be great for our economy in terms of lowering inflation. And I think you're also going to see a big thrust in deregulation. The estimated cost of the Biden era regulations, $1.4 trillion burden on the American economy. There's a lot of work to be done here, but I think the deregulatory thrust is going to be significant. And I think you'll see a lot of that starting on day one.
Senator, you have a pretty unique position as a former ambassador to Japan. I just wonder the speed that we're talking about, some of the initiatives that have come out with talk of tariffs, with questions about whether we would defend our allies in the way we have in the past without some give and take, just in terms of what we expect economically from them. Mm-hmm. What do our allies think about these moves? Are they nervous? Have you spoken with any of them? And how do you think this plays out?
I've spoken with a number of our allies. And you think about our trading relationships, and Becky, this is an historic issue. It goes back to World War II, where many economies were devastated after the war. We put in place very favorable trade terms, European economies, Japan, et cetera, because we didn't want them turning toward communism. We wanted them dealing with us. We should have time limited that. We should have put a GDP per capita limit. We did not. Today, we have very non-reciprocal relationships. And the result of that is we're not looking at a level playing field. President Trump wants to see that addressed. I think our trading partners understand that. I've been working very closely with Canada the past several days, really trying to block some actions that the Biden administration was trying to do at the 11th hour to harm U.S. companies, to allow Mexico to expropriate U.S. company property. Thankfully, Canada decided to work with me, to work with the new Trump administration coming in, and to block this from happening so the Biden administration could not inflict this sort of damage and allow this sort of expropriation to take place in Mexico with impunity. These types of arrangements and engagements, I think, are all positive, moving in the right direction. Our allies realize we've got to change the terms of trade. We've got to start working together, and we need to see reciprocity occur at every turn.
Senator, hold on for just a moment. We're watching some pictures here.
Yeah, Becky,
Certainly.
just as we're watching this picture, this is St. John's Church. This is just across the street from the White House itself. We're expecting President Trump to arrive here to take part in a service this morning. And we know from the pool reporters who are in the building that they've already seen a number of the Trump family, Ivanka Trump, Eric Trump, Pam Bondi, his Attorney General nominee, Lara Trump, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is there, Kash Patel is there, a whole host of folks as we see the motorcade now beginning to make some movements here. That is a motorcade leaving Blair House also across the street from the White House. That's the traditional place where presidents stay as they're waiting to be sworn in. Any dignitary who's visiting the White House, foreign heads of state, will stay at Blair House overnight if they're coming to meet with the President of the United States. Now we're seeing that motorcade make its way. It's going to make a couple of right turns here, go around the block and come back to the church. And we will expect to see President Trump entering St. John's Church here. We're running a few minutes behind it. We're expected to depart Blair House about 8:15. It's 8:41 now, so you can imagine a little bit of extra detail in the morning getting everything ready to go. But they are on the move now.
Vice President-elect J.D. Vance and his wife have entered St. John's as well, and we'll see that coming in just a moment. Senator Hagerty, we've been talking this morning about the coalition. This is a broader coalition that came together in Donald Trump's second election. How tenuous is that relationship? How tight is it? And I guess the question becomes, with a very thin majority in Congress, how do you get those things done? Where do you see the places where it's going to be smooth sailing? Where do you see issues where it might be a little rougher?
Well, I'm optimistic, Becky. I mean, President Trump definitely has opened the tent. He's really focused on the working man and woman here in America. Many of them felt forgotten for years. So I really do think there's a great opportunity. I think one of the first tests, Becky, will be this evening. We're going to move Senator Marco Rubio out of our Foreign Relations Committee this evening, and I hope be able to bring him to the floor and get consent from all of our colleagues, both Republican and Democrat, to move him into the Secretary of State slot. I'd like to see the same thing happen with John Ratcliffe coming out of the Intelligence Committee. As we begin to move on to these appointees, critical appointees from a national security standpoint, I have great optimism that we have the opportunity to see bipartisan cooperation here. Let's get these appointees put into office. Let's give President Trump the team he needs, particularly on critical national security areas, to get this thing moving, to make our nation as safe as possible.
And speaking of, we are looking at pictures of President Trump, or incoming President Trump, arriving at St. John's. He's just stepping out of the motorcade. Looks like he is taking a moment to look over at the cameras just now. Again, here's Melania Trump, who's walking in with him, and they are entering the church services where that service will take place. It was set to begin at about 8:30, so we're running probably about 15 minutes behind schedule this morning. We'll continue to see what's happening. They're being met right now by the officiant, it looks like.
Yeah, we're not going to be able to see pictures inside the church service, Becky, but we can expect that the family and friends will all be there, as well as a number of supporters and political allies of the president and the first lady, as you see them making their way into the church service. From there, they go to tea at the White House, which is expected at about 9:40 a.m. We'll see how the schedule flows throughout the day, as we're starting off a little bit behind schedule here, but you can expect they'll have it all put back together schedule-wise by the time the swearing-in comes just before noon today.
Senator Bill Hagerty, we want to thank you for joining us on a very busy day and what promises to be a very busy set of days and weeks to come. We appreciate your time today, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Great to be with you. Exciting day.
Thank you. Thanks. It is. Right now, we want to take a look at the potential economic policy changes in Trump's first 100 days. And Steve Liesman joins us right now for that. Steve, good morning.
Good morning, Becky. Yeah, President-elect Trump takes office with broad support for some of his policies from the public. In fact, our December CNBC All-America Economic Survey, Becky, found support for some of his signature policies exceeded his support at the ballot box. But of course, there were some warning signs for the incoming president in our numbers here. Take a look. 60% said the new administration should prioritize something like sending the military to the border to stop human and drug trafficking. Another 13% support the policy, but say it shouldn't be a priority. 24% oppose it. And then just moving down, a lot of support for individual tax cuts, a lot of support for cutting government spending, 50% in fact, and then increasing deportations, 45% say should be a priority, 20% said, yeah, we agree, but not right away. And then another group say increasing oil drilling, a lot of support for that. Where there are yellow and red lights for the incoming administration, cutting business taxes, a little less support. reducing business regulation also. That's going to be a priority. We expect, by the way, some executive orders on that relatively soon. Tariffs, even less so, and pardoning January 6 presidential people convicted in January 6, less support for that. The new president can use the bully puppet to sell these policies, but he needs to be a little careful. The economic numbers, as you know, Becky, have been pretty good. We need to be careful to fix what's broken, but not ruin what's been working.
Yeah, and probably one of the first places to point with that would be inflation. Right now, inflation seems to be under control. There have been questions about whether it's been really stubborn, really sticky. Last week, we did get some decent numbers on that front. Inflation a little cooler than had been anticipated. But that's going to be the big sticking point, inflation, because even though inflation has come down, we are still looking at prices that are 20% higher than when President Biden was elected. And that's going to be a number that people continue to feel that pain. If that doesn't get under control, that's a huge issue.
I think that's right. There is not all that much the president can do about it. He's talked about the idea of driving down oil prices and the idea that other prices would follow along with that. I'm not sure the president wants deflation, as in rolling back prices to the level they were before, though I think the public, if they could have their prices go down and not their wages, would be in favor of that. The trouble is, that's an economic trick nobody's pulled off.
Steve, thank you. And
Pleasure.
we will see you in just a little bit.
Sure.
Joining us right now to talk about more with what to expect is newly sworn-in Ohio Senator Bernie Moreno. He beat incumbent Sherrod Brown, who was the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee. Senator Moreno is going to be on Homeland Security Committee, the Banking, Budget, and Commerce Committees as well. And Senator Moreno, it sounds like a pretty large agenda of a lot of things that you've got your hands full with. What should we be anticipating in the first 100 days?
I think the most important thing your survey shows is we have to secure our border. We have to make it clear to the world there's only one way to come here, which is the legal path. So you're going to see a secure border, legislation, and executive orders around that. You're going to see deportation start with criminals, people who shouldn't be here, people who have deportation orders. So I think that's going to be important. I think the second part is to have fair and reciprocal trade. We've been getting ripped off by China and also, quite frankly, by our allies, and that's going to stop. And then, of course, lowering prices.
In terms of tariffs being part of that plan, in terms of deportations, and obviously we're not talking about the people who have criminal records, but if you're talking about the 8.3 million or so of undocumented or illegal immigrants who are working right now, if you deport most of them, you're going to be looking at probably higher prices along the way. And that issue with inflation, Senator, is one that there have been a lot of questions about. How do you do all of these things and not raise prices for Americans?
Well, President Trump did it in his first term. We had generationally low inflation, generationally low interest rates as a result, wages that were going up for blacks, for Hispanics, for women. So those are the same things we're going to do again this term, except now we have a Republican Congress that's going to work with President Trump en masse to get these things done. Look, the American people at the end of the day don't care how any of these things are done. What they care is that they have the results that they voted for, and that's what we're ready and standing here ready to get done with President Trump for the American people.
Senator, I'm wondering, as a freshman senator, you look at this new DOGE committee set up by President Trump. Elon Musk is going to be running it. Traditionally, senators are very protective of their prerogatives, very protective of the power of the purse up on Capitol Hill. And this idea that you could have this outside committee coming in and telling you all what to spend money on and what not to spend money on. In an older era, that would have been sort of a radioactive proposal. But I'm wondering now, with President Trump's popularity, you coming to office as a new senator, how do you see the DOGE committee? Is this something you're going to just rubber stamp whatever the recommendations are, or are you going to be skeptical of what it is that you see?
Well, I think all of us are working together with DOGE to figure out what we can do around government efficiency, lowering costs. Look, healthcare is an opportunity to lower costs dramatically, improve services. Procurement in the military is an opportunity. Lowering the number of people working in these agencies from obscenely high numbers is an opportunity. Getting some of these agencies out of Washington, D.C. I can tell you, look, I don't know any different because I just started, but there's certainly a sense here in Washington, D.C. that the way we used to do things just didn't work. It gave us $36 trillion in debt and a country that is less safe and less prosperous than it's ever been. So there's an atmosphere here to do things differently. That's what makes me excited every day to come here to the Capitol to get things done.
Yeah, very interesting time, Senator, and you've got a unique perspective as a newly sworn-in senator. We appreciate your time today, Senator Moreno.
Thank you.
Thank you. When we come back, we're going to talk tech and small business in the second Trump administration with Steve Case. That's next. And later, legendary investor Stan Druckenmiller will join us on his expectations for the markets in Trump's second term, the things that he is watching right now. CNBC's special inauguration coverage continues after a very quick break. All right, welcome back, everyone. Our next guest is here to weigh in on how the tech sector will change in Trump's second term. Joining us right now is AOL co-founder Steve Case. He's now the chairman and CEO of D.C.-based investment firm Revolution. He's a friend of the show. We get to talk to him all the time. And Steve, it's really great to see you this morning.
Great to be back with you in this chilly city.
Yeah, I think from the technology perspective, this is so much different than anything we've ever seen before. To have all of these tech leaders who are here, who we almost never see at inaugurations, to have them all have front and center seating for some of these issues. What's changed about this? Why is Silicon Valley and why are tech leaders here this time around?
Well, I've been saying for many years, over a decade, that we need to build more of a bridge between Silicon Valley and Washington, D.C. The innovators need to engage with the policymakers. So I think it's a healthy process to make sure their voices are heard. At the same time, we need to make sure we have the right checks and balances, and Congress does its things. But overall, I think it's a positive to get people who are focused on the future working with the government to try to make sure America can continue to be the most innovative entrepreneurial nation. But we also do it in a more inclusive way. One of the areas we worked on with Rise the Rest and Tech Hubs was how to get more venture capital in more places. The 31 states that President Trump won only got 16% of venture capital. Right. The other states were 84%.
This was in 2023,
we still have this dynamic,
right? The numbers that you guys
where most of the capital goes to Silicon Valley, New York City, Boston, not enough to Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, other states. So we need to focus in the next few years on that. So I hope it's not just innovating in general, but also innovating in ways that it brings along more people, more places within our country.
So the Vice President-elect, J.D. Vance, worked at Revolution with you for 18 months. That was a huge focus of his, too.
He led that effort. He was the managing partner of that Rise of the Rest effort.
So is this something that you think changes with this administration? What do you know? What have you talked to him about? What plans are there to make sure that this Rise of the Rest really continues and more money gets pushed those directions?
I think it will be a priority. Obviously, they're just taking office today, so they have to set their priorities. But I think based on some of the things that President-elect Trump has said, as well as Vice President-elect Vance have said, that will be a priority. Part of the appeal of the campaign were people who felt left out, felt left behind, didn't feel like they were part of the future. The innovation momentum building was not necessarily helping them, their family, their community. So hopefully it will be the Rise of the Rest, and tech hubs, things like that will be a key part of this.
Does that come with government spending, or is this private spending that maybe is partnered with some of that?
It's a mix. Some of the government investment through the Department of Commerce on tech hubs has helped build some momentum there. The SBA has programs like the SBIC program that's trying to get more capital to more venture firms in different parts of the country. So the government has a role to play. Ultimately, it's obviously the private sector, the investors and the entrepreneurs who are going to really be creating the future and funding the future. But there obviously is a role for government to play, including on issues like immigration. One of the things that I was pleased to see was President-elect Trump was talking about the need for high-skilled immigration, and that's something I've been arguing for more than a decade. We need to continue to be a magnet for talent and recognize these are job makers, not job takers. And a number of proposals, a skilled worker visa, Heartland visa, startup visa has emerged. There are probably ways to improve H-1B visa programs so we're able to attract the talent we need to start the companies we need to lead the future and create more jobs in this country, all across this country. I think that needs to be a priority. Sounds like it may be in the first few months.
Part of the coalition, though, of President Trump's coalition disagrees with the H-1B visas. You know that this has been a big battle. Steve Bannon has talked about this, thinks Elon Musk is evil for bringing in the H-1B visas, thinks they're stealing American jobs. How do you navigate that, and what changes could be made to the H-1B visa program to make it a stronger, better program?
I think the Economic Innovation Group, EIG, which worked a lot with the Trump administration, Opportunity Zones, has made a number of proposals, including shifting the H-1B to what they called more of a skilled skilled worker visa, Heartland visa was part of that. So I think there are some improvements. I think some of this is just politics. And, I try to stay out of the politics and focus on policy in a bipartisan way. I think when people look at the facts, they realize that attracting talent, including people like Elon Musk, to this country to start companies here that allows America to lead in the future, allows America to be creating the jobs here, is important. And that attracting talent from all around the world, which has been part of the secret sauce that's powered the American story over the last 249 years, we need to continue to do that. So I'm on the side of attracting more of that talent that are the job creators, but doing it probably in a somewhat smarter way than just some of the traditional programs.
Steve, what do you make of this unprecedented jump ball over the weekend over TikTok? Whether that service will be able to continue, goes dark, comes back again. President Trump now proposing this idea of having the United States, maybe even United States taxpayers, it's a little unclear, take a stake up to 50% in the company and then try to spin it off domestically. Is that workable? What do you think should happen?
Well, it's a little bit Forrest Gumpy. Yesterday, I happened to be with Ted Leon's his long-term partner at the Capital One Arena, and was with the CEO of TikTok show when President-elect Trump yesterday announced this
You're with him when it happened?
New plan, which seemed to be news to him. But I think if you take a step back, people love TikTok. It's a popular service. It should continue. But there are legitimate concerns about national security. People I know and respect, like Senator Warner on the Senate side, or Mike Gallagher when he led this effort on the House side, are really quite concerned about some of the national security implications. And they have access to classified intelligence I don't have access to, but I trust them to say that is a problem. So it's severing that from Chinese control and potential influence by the Communist Party is going to have to happen. And so figure out ways to allow the service to continue, but do it in a way that changes some of the ownership.
Should the U.S. government own it?
I don't think the government own it. I think there'll be some other private sector option that's emerged. Even when the President Trump was president, 4 years ago, there was a plan to try to transition it. So I don't know the details, but I think there is a way to allow TikTok to continue, but do it in a way that also is sensitive to national security. No, we'll stay out of that.
But this was news to the CEO of TikTok, who you were with yesterday.
Well, I think there had been some rumblings that something would happen, but the specific, he didn't know that. I don't think that President-elect Trump was going to announce that at that particular rally. I think they did realize, and because of some of the previous announcements, they kind of, as I recall, they kind of shut it down 2 days ago. Started opening it back yesterday.
TikTok kind of shut themselves down.
Yeah, and so we'll see how this plays out, and I don't know what the specific solution will be, but I think TikTok will be allowed to continue in this country, but there will be a shift in ownership.
It's not as easy for President Trump to undo it with an executive action or an executive order, because this is a law that's now been not only signed into law, but also upheld by the Supreme Court.
And we need to be careful, make sure that Congress passes laws, the Supreme Court. We need to make sure that there's a role for the president, but there's also checks and balances in our system. And you're right, we don't want a precedent of a president unilaterally just deciding he doesn't like a law and wants to change it. So it's going to take some amount of time to figure this out. Hopefully, we can strike the right balance and deal with what I think are legitimate national security concerns while still allowing a service that obviously is quite popular to continue.
Steve, you've been here for a very long time in the Washington area, as long as I've known you.
Like 4 decades,
yeah. As long as I've known you.
Long enough.
Tick, tick, tick.
What do you think is different now? How does this feel different to you? What's new, and I guess what's the same? As somebody who's watched all of this?
Well, there's always, since I have been here a long time, but change of administration, change of priorities. There's always hope for the people that supported them, some fear from the people that supported somebody else, and it takes some time to settle out. I think I'm sensing this week from people I've talked to a hope that there is more of an engagement with the private sector, particularly with the innovators, Silicon Valley and elsewhere. They'll have more of a voice, and probably are ways that Elon Musk and others can bring some fresh thinking to regulations, maybe simplify some things. Housing, for example, one of the things I hope will happen is changing some of the opportunity zone legislation. We need a lot more housing. We need to figure out ways to allow people to build it faster and cheaper, which does require some policy changes, both at the national and local level, and a lot of other things. So taking a fresh look at regulations, I think, is important. Taking a fresh look at spending. We do have some serious debt issues. I think that's all positive. Exactly how it plays out, how long people like Elon Musk and others stay engaged. I think we're probably a 3 to 6 month surge where a number of things will happen, and then things will kind of settle back. So hopefully it'll be positive. There's always a risk that there's an overreach and it creates some problems. But overall, I think people are optimistic that it's a new day and some new voices will be there, and hopefully we will be able to strike the right balance, including checks and balances with the presidency and Congress and the courts, and bring in these new voices, but make sure we also are listening to a broad set, a diverse set of voices, and not just the folks from Silicon Valley coming waltzing into Washington, whispering in the president's ear.
The rise of the rest. Steve, want to thank you very much for being with us. It's really great to see you in person.
Great to be with you.
Steve Case. Still to come this morning, more of our big lineup ahead as we bring you live coverage of the inauguration of Donald Trump. In the next hour, Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla, former New Hampshire Governor Chris Coons, and legendary investor Stan Druckenmiller. You are watching CNBC's special coverage of the inauguration of Donald J. Trump. We'll be back after a quick break.
This is Squawk Pod's special 2025 inauguration episode from CNBC. Here's Becky Quick.
President-elect Trump is expected to prioritize policies that address health care access and costs, among many other things that he's going to be doing in this first 100 days. Joining us right now to focus on this portion of things is Albert Bourla. He is the CEO of Pfizer. He's also the incoming chairman of the Pharma Industry Group. So he's somebody who's speaking with all of his colleagues about the things that they're concerned about, too. And Albert, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Healthcare is front and center, and this is an arena where we're not entirely sure what incoming President Trump thinks about some of these things. He has broken with some of the traditional Republican ways of looking at things. He's got people like Bernie Sanders, Senator Sanders, who is willing to work with him on some of the issues that he has brought up to this point. But what do you think we can expect from this second Trump administration?
I think radical change. But with change, always it comes risks and opportunities. I believe that the opportunities clearly outweigh the risks. I see way more opportunity to make things much better than not. But the point is not to speculate if risks or opportunities will prevail. It is what you do to make sure that you influence things to the direction that it is pro-innovation, pro-patients. And that's what we do.
So what are the opportunities? What are the biggest opportunities here?
I think in general, a better business climate and a better business atmosphere will create an environment that all businesses will thrive, including us. The current administration has a very deep, the incoming President Trump's administration has a deep belief that strong business, strong private sector, strong entrepreneurship makes America great. There are many members of the White House now in the Biden administration and in the cabinet that also believe the same. And those are the people that we work hand in hand over the last 4 years. And I'm very proud of the things that we were able to accomplish together. But the truth is that the influence is not with them. The influence, it is with the extreme left. And right now they have the ideological dominance and they hate business. Not they don't believe we need to support business. They hate it. And that's a very big change.
What has it meant for your business?
IRA. I mean, it was a terrible situation.
The Inflation Reduction Act, which allows the government to negotiate with the drug companies and puts them, well, I wouldn't say negotiate, puts them on the list for price setting in some situations.
Yeah, they have a list price setting that it is without any controls. They have the power to do whatever they want. And it is not only that. They have the so-called penalty for the pill penalty, where the large molecules are getting protection of 13 years and the small molecules, the pills, are getting only for 9. This is driving behaviors. I don't know how they thought about it. People, companies, will not invest in small molecules, even if it is the right way to fight a disease, because they know that it is only 9 years compared to 13 if it is large molecules. Science should pick the winners, not the policies.
So what happens with the IRA? You've spoken with incoming President Trump. Is he going to stand by those parts of the IRA, or will that be stripped away?
I can't speak about his intentions. He's the only one that he can do that. What I know it is that I explained the issues to him and he understood them.
He understood them. He's talked a lot about wanting to bring down drug prices, and I think part of who he's targeted with this have been the pharmacy benefits managers. He said that specifically in some of his speeches. What do you think when it comes to the pharmacy benefits managers?
I think he's right. I think we need to find a clear way to change the way that the system works right now with the PBMs and what the president calls the middlemen, and they are. Right now, you need to understand that the difference between the list prices that you pay to the pharmacy when you go to buy your medicines and the net prices that we charge to the PBMs, it is 50% difference. When I say 50, it's half. So you pay double right now than what they pay us when you go to collect your drug medicines. That is what makes completely unaffordable medicines for the patient.
When did that go wrong? Because pharmacy benefits managers were there to try and keep prices from getting higher. Was it when they were bought by insurance companies, or what happened along the way that you think changed the behavior of the PBMs?
Many things happened along the way, and you're right that the PBMs were set up so that they can negotiate prices, and rightly so, and I think they have a very important role to play. But the system over time, and that includes our also engagement with the system, because we were the ones who were accepting to have huge list prices and huge rebates to justify, because that was the only way that we can get access. But that's wrong. The fee of the PBM should not be connected to the list price, because if it is the higher the list price, the higher the fee, then they have a clear incentive to ask for high list prices.
The entire system, the entire medical health system is very convoluted, very opaque, and some people say that that is a feature, not an accident, not a bug, that it's designed that way to make sure that you don't see exactly where the prices are and where the fat is. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely agree with that. And that's the other thing, not only the link of the fee, but also transparency.
Yeah.
We need to know when there is a rebate, where the rebate goes. That much to the premium, that much to the patient, that much to the payer. Right now, we don't know. And there is very credible voices that they think maybe they keep it all, or maybe they keep the biggest part of it. Shouldn't be like that. Transparency is important.
All right, let's talk about the risks to your industry. And that would be Robert Kennedy Jr. coming in as the head of HHS. He is seen as someone who's a leading anti-vax proponent, or anti-vax against vaccines. That's a big issue. You've spoken with him, I think, too.
Mm-hmm.
What did you take away?
First of all, it's not me that I select the Secretary of State, and shouldn't be that the CEOs are involved in this. It's the President and the Senate that confirms them. If he's confirmed, we will work with him, because what is the alternative? To fight? Mm-hmm. Clearly, there are things that we have very big differences, and if he tries to implement few of the things that he has said about vaccines, I think he will find in front of us, not us only, but the entire medical community, the entire scientific community, the payers and employers, because they believe that vaccines are the most cost-effective way. There are a lot of organizations in this country that they will oppose that. But there are things that Kennedy says that we can work with. And I don't see why we wouldn't be able to create together something on cancer, for example, so that we can find the cure of cancer. Mm-hmm. And the boldness of this administration, if it is implemented, imagine a new Operation Warp Speed that is focusing this time not to find the solution for COVID, but to find the solution for lung cancer. That would be very effective, and that would be something that all the Americans will applaud. Mm-hmm.
We're watching members of the Trump family and others who are leaving the church at St. John's, that church service that took place, and you're now going to have the president-elect and the vice president-elect, or the president-elect who's going over to the White House to be having tea with the current President Biden at this time for the next step of this inauguration. You're on your way to the Rotunda, too. Have you been to inaugurations in the past?
Pfizer has already been, but 8 years ago, it was the remote. Other CEO. Yeah. And 4 years ago with President Biden, because of COVID, we didn't have a ceremony. Okay. But we are always supporting the inaugurations.
And it sounds like you're very involved and you're willing to work with whatever comes your way.
Absolutely.
Albert Bourla, I want to thank you very much for joining us this morning. I know it's a very busy morning, and we appreciate your being here.
Thank you very much, Becky.
Thank you. Our next guest is one of the only current business owners in the U.S. Senate and brings 25 years of entrepreneurial leadership to Washington. Joining us right now is Republican Senator Markwayne Mullin. He is part of the deputy whip team and Leader Thune's leadership table. And Senator, thank you very much for being here. We hear about what
Becky.
a busy activity we're going to get in the first few days, not just the first 100 days, but the first few days that are coming your way. What do you all have planned from the Senate perspective? What are you going to be working on?
Well, immediately after the swearing in, we go right into committees, confirmation hearings, and then we move to the floor. So at 5 o'clock, we will move into the Senate Committee on Armed Services, where we will vote Pete Hegseth out, and then he'll be reported to the floor. Today, we're still working on a deal, trying to get the Democrats to agree with us like we did with Biden 4 years ago, to bring in Marco Rubio, John Ratcliffe, and hopefully Mike Waltz, because they've already been vetted. They were members of Congress. They had their security clearances, and allow them to go ahead and be confirmed today. If not, we'll immediately go right into the 30 hours of debate that we have to have. But we're going to be working late nights and possibly even through the weekend to get President Trump's cabinet confirmed. As far as here in the Capitol, Becky, what the president is pushing out every single day right now, moving forward, will be promises made, promises kept. He wants to get America back on track, securing our border, bringing down energy costs by bringing down or by making us energy independent, which will bring down, obviously, will bring down inflation, and then also going after to protect our children from this transgender woke agenda that the Biden administration has forced on our kids.
And what does that mean? How do you go after that, and how do you tackle that?
Well, one, it goes back and allow parents to be back involved in their kids. All this stuff about children under 18 years old not having to consult with their parents before they get before they go through a transition process is absolutely ridiculous. Allowing schools to make that decision, that shouldn't be part of it. So we're going to go after that. We're also going to end taxpayers funding transgender processes, be it from the children perspective or from prisoners, male prisoners that are using it and abusing it. When we start talking about going after energy independence, what we're going to be talking about is bringing back the policies that President Trump had in place his first term, allowing the producers to start producing oil and gas, releasing some of these bans that the Biden administration has put in on public land, and then at the same time releasing the pipelines again. Right now, the pipelines can only run at about 80% capacity at most. Once we allow those to move to the full capacity they're permitted for, we can move product from point A to point B faster, and that'll also bring down the cost. When we start talking about securing the border, Becky, what we're talking about is ending this catch and release, this pardon that Biden put in place where everybody's pardoned before they even cross the border because they can get on the app. And putting back Remain in Mexico. We're going to continue to secure the border by building the wall, and we're going to deploy troops because it's a national security risk at this point to work side by side with our Border Patrol. And then we're going to classify the cartels in MS-13 as a true terrorist organization that we can use all the resources to go after.
Senator, we're just looking at some pictures of President-elect Trump and Melania Trump leaving St. John's Church. They're headed back to the motorcade where they will take a quick trip over to the White House to meet with President Biden for tea at the White House. This is a service that's very traditionally done. Wasn't done 4 years ago. It's traditionally done, and they are on their way over. And then the president-elect and the current president of the United States will ride together over to the inauguration services. I mean, this is a different inauguration. It's not outside, and I know you had some disappointed constituents who were here for that. Obviously, the weather not allowing that this time around. But what are you anticipating today?
Well, I got up this morning and I thought the air tasted better as I breathed it in my lungs. I thought the sunshine was absolutely beautiful, and some reason my protein shake even tasted better. I think it's a new day for America. And so we're excited about the movement. You can go, Becky, you remember what this place was like in 2017. There was riots going on. There was protests everywhere. There was cars on fire. And this is different this time around. People are excited, from CEOs to athletes to the average American. You walk around the streets here in Washington, D.C., and people are legitimately excited and in a good mood, and they're optimistic. And I think that's where the American people are. That's why they overwhelmingly elected President Trump, because they're optimistic about our future.
It is a really heavy lift that you all have planned, and you're using the reconciliation process. At this point, the president-elect has said that he would like to see one bill rather than two. I know Senator Thune, probably if he had his druthers, would have taken two bills and been able to work in parts. How much more complicated is this to have one heavy lift? What happens just in terms of wrangling, making sure you have the votes to do lots of different things at once, where it may be a little tougher to build a coalition?
Well, Becky, what President Trump said, he would like to have one big, beautiful bill, and it allows a lot more negotiations to take place. Remember, President Trump wrote the book on Art of the Deal. He loves negotiating. And when you put more in a bill, it allows you to get more of a coalition together, but it also gets it very complicated and hard to pass. And so our idea is we'd like to have something passed by Memorial Weekend. It's going to be difficult, though, because when you start negotiating, you have people like Chip Roy, who is on one side of the aisle, that wants to pay for SALT increase by increasing in corporate taxes. Well, that's a non-starter for people. But at the same time, we know Chip wants to get border security and energy independence. And so when you're able to do one big, beautiful bill, sometimes you can get enough in there for people to be able to vote for that maybe wouldn't vote for it separately. If you separate the two, which might happen because it's less complicated, you can put border and put energy on one bill and try to do taxes on the second one. When you try to do taxes separately, we will get it done because we have to, because a lot of taxes are going to expire this year. But it'll complicate it more. So the president has said he wants results. And so if we can deliver one big bill, that's his preference because it moves faster. But if not, he's okay with dividing it up in two. So we're going to give the House time to work its will, and we'll have a contingency plan here on the Senate. If they can't get it done, then we'll work with two separate bills.
Senator Markwayne Mullin, thank you for joining us this morning, sir.
Thank you, Becky. Thanks for having me on.
Mm-hmm. Still to come on our special coverage of Inauguration Day, legendary investor Stanley Druckenmiller will be our special guest to talk about what investors can expect from the Trump administration. Our live coverage of the inauguration of Donald J. Trump continues after a quick break. The incoming Trump administration just briefing reporters on the executive orders that will be put in place later today. For that, we're joined by CNBC's Emily Wilkins, who's at the Capitol and was on that call. Emily, what did you learn?
Hey, Becky. Well, we've got a number of different calls today. The one that I was on really emphasized that Trump will be signing an executive order today that will really be seeking to eliminate all sorts of DEI programs, policies, anything like that that was put in place by the administration. They are now eliminating that and going ahead and eliminating the funding. In addition to that, Trump is also expected to sign another executive order today that defines its U.S. policy to recognize two sexes, male and female, and to refer to folks by their biological sex. And of course, this is going against a lot of the transgender policies that Biden, again, put into place. So those are just the two for today that we know about from this call. But we also know, because Stephen Miller met with top Republicans yesterday, that there are other proposals in the works when it comes to reforming the federal government. And going back to DEI, one of the things that Miller touched on in that call was that the administration is also going to be looking at ways to address DEI in the private sector, also trying to eliminate that. Also expect to see some changes when it comes to the government workforce, how government employees can be hired, whether they can be let go for insubordination, and what that process would look like. And then, of course, bringing it back to the wonkily titled Schedule F, which basically just defines which appointees can be politically appointed and which ones are career appointees that will go through the administration regardless of party. Trump is again looking to address that. And so two executive orders that we're expecting on DEI and gender and biological sex today, and more to come. So Becky will, of course, be keeping a close eye on that.
Okay, Emily, thank you. And I guess some of these things are still vague at this point. We're getting some of the details, but I guess we'll get much more as the day continues.
We're definitely expecting to get more details on a number of these, Becky, as the executive orders roll out. And then I think beyond that, the executive orders come out. That's kind of just an easy first step for Trump to take. The real challenge here is going to be taking these executive orders and getting them into law. And the lawmakers who I've spoken with, they say, hey, we have a plan for it. We have a process. Of course, it's going to be interesting to see how Congress navigates all of this with the slight margins in the House and in the Senate, as well as, of course, the debate. over exactly what this first package is going to look like, whether it's going to have everything, whether it's only going to have part of things. So many decisions left to be made here on Capitol Hill, and a lot that's left to be done to put some of these executive orders and really put some power behind them and what they're going to mean and how they can be enforced.
Okay. Emily, thank you very much. Emily Wilkins, who we will check back in with in just a little while. Up next, though, Democratic Senator and co-chair of the Harris campaign, Chris Coons, will join us right after this break. Plus, he's been a staunch supporter of President Trump. Former New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu will join us to talk about the future of the Republican Party and the incoming administration's economic agenda. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everybody. Time now for a look at what President-elect Trump is inheriting from the Biden administration and what Democratic senators might be thinking about in terms of where they could work with the Trump administration, where they won't. Joining us right now is Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. He was also the co-chair of the Harris campaign. He's out with an op-ed today that says Democrats can work with Trump, but not on the plans that he has outlined. Senator Coons, first of all, thank you for being here this morning. We were just looking at pictures of people entering the White House. I think we are watching
Vice President Harris and Vice President-elect Vance just at the North Portico of the White House there, posing with their spouses, turning and entering the White House, along with the military aides there to smooth things along. That was a fascinating picture of the woman who ran for president of the United States, was defeated by Donald Trump, and now stands on the North Portico to greet Donald Trump and her replacement as Vice President of the United States.
Okay. Senator Coons, thank you for joining us this morning. I think your point in the op-ed was pretty interesting, just this idea that you can tackle inflation or you can do mass deportations of immigration, but probably not both at the same time.
Becky, thanks for a chance to be on this morning. And what we're seeing there at the North Portico of the White House is the peaceful transfer of power, something President Biden and Vice President Harris have been steadfastly committed to, making sure that today's inauguration goes smoothly. The editorial you're referencing, which was posted on the Bulwark this morning, is one where I say that if President-elect Trump genuinely intends to impose double-digit tariffs, price hikes on products coming into the United States from Canada, Mexico, and China, it'll raise prices. And in my view, a lot of Americans who voted for President-elect Trump did so because they were sick of high prices. And they'd like us to work together to grow our economy and to reduce the cost of things like housing and prescription drugs. But if we slap 25% tariffs on everything coming in from Canada, the price of gas will go up and the price of housing will go up, given how much oil and lumber we import from Canada. So that was my first point. The second one was that mass deportations, literally deporting millions of people, will also have an impact on our workforce, on our ability to deliver groceries and housing affordably to the American people. So we could work together, we should, on identifying, detaining, and deporting criminal aliens, those who've committed additional crimes against the American people. But those who are here without committing additional crimes, and that's millions and millions of people, are also contributing to our labor force. We should be able to find a way forward through this, both on tariffs, which act as essentially a national sales tax, and on deportation. Those were the two issue areas that I focused on in my editorial.
I think, look, we've had a lot of people on today and talked about this, and some of the Republican senators and others we've talked to have said, look, we're going to take care of that by doing things like executive orders to open up for more energy, more quick energy drilling without some of the slowdown with the regulatory oversight process. That will do things like bring down inflation on energy prices, which was a big part of the problem that we've been facing over 4 years. Look, we're still looking at inflation, Becky, even though it's come down. Go ahead, Senator.
If I could, on that point, this past year, the United States produced more oil and gas than at any time in its history. We produced both more renewable energy and more oil and gas than the United States ever has before. So this idea that somehow unleashing drilling is going to bring down energy prices, I think flies in the face of the facts that we are already the world's leading oil and gas producer, as well as producing a record amount of renewables in the past year.
Not energy prices, but prices overall, inflationary prices are up about 20% from where they were when President Biden took office. Obviously, they've come down, but those are some pretty persistent numbers, some pretty persistent price shocks to the American people. I hear your point about thinking it's going to be very difficult to keep inflation under control while you're also exporting mass numbers of illegal immigrants who are working here in this country, 8.3 million, according to the Pew Research Center. But there are also people who will say, look, you can't flout the law. You can't not enforce the law when it comes to these things. We should be looking at ways for more legal immigration.
That's right. And so one of the challenges within the Maga movement and within the incoming Trump administration is the sharp fight between those like Elon Musk, who run big tech companies, who advocate for more H-1B visas for high-skilled legal immigrants, and those like Steve Bannon and others who say, no, the whole Maga movement was about ending immigration, both illegal and reducing legal immigration. That's a fight within the Republican caucus and the incoming administration that they're going to have to sort out. I think we need more high-skilled legal immigration in order to keep our currently strong economy moving forward. Look, in recent months, we've had record stock market highs. We've had periods of record low unemployment. I think that President Biden is leaving President Trump a strong economy, stronger than any other developed economy in how it's recovered from the pandemic. Yes, prices went up a lot because of the recovery from the pandemic. Inflation is coming down and prices have stabilized. I look forward to finding ways we can work with the incoming administration to continue in that direction, because that's what Delawareans asked me to do. But where he wants to do things that will shoot prices up, like imposing high tariffs on our top 3 trading partners, I just think that's a bad idea.
Senator, it's Eamon Javers here. And as you look ahead to this legislative session, I wonder if you think about Democrats being in the minority, you talk about working together with the incoming team. But I wonder if you can give us any insight at all into the strategy for Democrats to oppose some of what President-elect Trump is doing. Are you going to pick your sweet spots here to oppose things, or are you going to try to oppose across the board? And given the limited numbers that you have up on Capitol Hill, how do you expect to be able to do that?
Well, the editorial I published this morning that I was just talking about emphasizes that exact point. We need to find places we can work together because that's what the American people want of us. But we also need to stay true to our core convictions and values and oppose initiatives that we think are really not in the best interest of the American people. We don't know yet exactly what the Trump legislative agenda will be. He's issuing, I think, 100 executive orders today. And historically, there's been a big gap between what he says on the campaign trail and what he actually does. Is he really going to go to war with Denmark to try and take over Greenland? I don't think so. I certainly hope not. That would be profoundly disruptive and frankly, unnecessary. So even in the last week, he's been talking about some things that I don't think are serious policy proposals. Could we find a way to work together on Greenland to increase America's engagement and defense? To open up this market to the development of critical minerals? I think we could. But we would have to do it in a way that respects that Denmark is a NATO ally and Greenland is a part of Denmark today. So there's different ways to go about the same goal. And I think in the coming weeks, we're going to sort out the difference between campaign rhetoric and governing reality.
Senator Coons, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Becky.
Mm-hmm. Right now, I want to bring in another guest in studio with us this morning, former New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu. And Governor, thank you.
I don't think Denmark ever thought they were going to get so much attention on Inauguration Day. How exciting for them.
Who knew? Let's talk about what is happening here from the economic perspective, the economic agenda on things. We are talking about a lot of executive orders, a lot of executive actions that are expected to begin immediately. And there has been a real sense in business confidence, at least. If you talk to any of the places that are measuring that when it comes to CEOs of big companies, CEO of small companies, there is a different feeling here. What's your perspective?
There's no doubt. So much of what we deal with the inflationary pressures that Americans deal with come from regulation, right? Because there's regulatory inflationary issues that come to bear. So from a business perspective, I think the business leaders say, wow, this could really open up opportunity. There's so much cash, as you guys know better than most, so much cash being held out there to hedge against what might potentially come. Could there be tariff hikes? Absolutely. I think they'll be short. I think they'll be fast. And I think they'll put America in a better place to negotiate something long-term.
Being short and fast, meaning they won't last.
They won't last.
Threats that are used.
Yeah, because it's always it's short-term pain for us, long-term pain for either whether a Canada, a China, or other folks around the world.
If they don't last, though, you don't get the revenue benefit that the president-elect has been talking about in terms of offsetting the deficit. So it's sort of like you're
catch-22.
Yeah, you're
it is in the short term, but the idea is to get better long-term deals. Not just on tariffs, but on all the other international issues, putting America back as a kind of that force to be reckoned with and should be reckoned with in terms of maintaining peace. I'm a big believer that we don't need to be the police officers of the world, but with America's strength comes world peace.
We had Albert Bourla on a little earlier, and it's not unusual to hear political leaders who will say, look, the current administration, the Biden administration, didn't like businesses, didn't like business leaders. We heard that from the CEO of Pfizer.
Oh, it's very real.
Morning.
You're hearing it across the board.
But you don't always hear that. And now he said that. He said it was a very anti-business administration, that it was too pushed by the left. He also said there are risks, though, that come with this new administration. He said he thinks the benefits outweigh the risks.
Sure.
But the risks that he would point to would be things like tariffs that come through, questions about what happens from his perspective with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. coming in to take over if he's anti-vax, what happens with some of those issues.
I think what you'll see, look, I have my skepticism about RFK Jr., but what you're going to see with him and HHS is a huge opportunity of efficiency, breaking down, I'll call it the cartels within healthcare, making it more accessible to folks at a real, I was talking to some folks the other day about dialysis. Dialysis is a multi-hundreds of billions of dollars of cost, effectively run by a few companies in America. We have to break that down, modernize the treatments, and that's just one example of many where you find efficiency, save money. These DOGE efforts, people talk about this program and that program. There's literally $500 billion right off the top that you can find efficiencies for. And I'm always a believer. You go to the governors, Republican governors especially, that know how to create efficiency in government, quality programs, delivering services, but again, pulling back on a lot of that bureaucratic malaise that just bogs things down, makes permits last 2 years, not 2 months, decentralizing government. Huge opportunity there.
What's the appropriate relationship between a president of the United States and an American CEO? And we're seeing this fascinating moment today where we have all of these CEOs alongside President-elect Trump. We're just getting some reporting from inside the church service that just wrapped. Mark Zuckerberg was in church today. Jeff Bezos was in church today. Sundar Pichai, Tim Cook, all sitting in one pew. Rupert Murdoch was there. Joe Rogan was there. This is a display of corporate might that we haven't seen before in a presidential inauguration. And yet you wonder at what point does that tip over into governmental coercion of a CEO to take certain actions?
As a governor, as the chief executive of New Hampshire, I should be on their speed dial. You need something, you have a problem, let me know. Now, good leadership says, I can do that, I can't do that. We can work with the legislature here. So as long as you have the right leadership in there, they know their boundaries and their limitations. It's not coercion. It's how do I get a better result? How do we get that product out? Because it's all about getting the product out, helping the employees, the workforce, the benefits, the costs. And if the CEOs can talk to a governor about, gee, there's an unintended consequence of a bill, there's an unintended consequence of your action, we can adjust. So you want to have a fast feedback response system, and you do that by making sure that everyone can get you when you need it. And a good leadership knows when to say no, how to say no, and how to kind of make sure that the process is being as transparent as possible.
In this case, you just lean right over the pew and talk directly to the principal.
I think it was great to see all those business. It wasn't bureaucrats and political staff in that church. Yeah. It was business leaders. It was folks that hire America. There's big government in there. There's a lot of big money in that church. I don't know if they're passing the plate, but they should.
They should. Missed opportunity if they didn't,
missed
right?
opportunity if you don't get Zuckerberg and Bezos in the same offering. But
Governor, you have a unique perspective because your father was the chief of staff to George H.W. Bush. And I'm just thinking about the pace of change, what's going to happen, not just in the first 100 days, maybe the first 100 hours, maybe the first few weeks on this.
Don't be afraid of speed. Speed is a good thing because not only is President Trump going to set his agenda, he's going to say, we need to do this now. We were elected for a reason. I said I was going to do it. We're going to do it. Some things will be a precursor to legislation in the Capitol. Some things will be things that can be done internationally, and some things will just be executive orders that take place. Some will be challenged in court. But he's setting that tone. Let's get it done. 4 years it was going to go by real fast.
Such a big contrast from the first term where they got bogged down in the repeal and replace of Obamacare. That took months. It took a lot of the steam out. We're seeing what they're calling shock and awe in terms of the executive orders. We're seeing a big action up front. And I think this is a president-elect who now knows that you don't have very much time.
That's right.
Officially, it's 4 years, but it might only be 6 months.
And I would argue in 17 and 18, he really didn't understand. He didn't understand how that congressional, presidential, executive, legislative process worked. And he would get frustrated with it and bogged down with it. They know. And their team, his team, Susie Wiles, this team is a really good team. They know how this process works.
It's different this time.
They're going to really hit the ground running. It's effectively his 9th year, if you think about it, right? He's had 9 years of experience of understanding the system to really hit the ground running. I think it's great. We're not going to all agree with everything he does, but he's moving quick. It's anti-bureaucratic, and every American should be happy about that.
Chris, thank you.
You bet.
Former New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Up next, investor and former hedge fund manager Stan Druckenmiller of Duquesne Family Office will join us on the markets and what he's expecting from the Trump economy. And in the next hour, Business Roundtable CEO Josh Bolten will be our guest. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everybody. Let's talk markets and the incoming administration. Joining us right now is Duquesne Family Office Chairman and CEO Stanley Druckenmiller. Stan, first of all, thank you for being with us this morning. I know a lot of people have been wondering how you're feeling about things just from a markets perspective, from an economy perspective. What do you have to say today?
Good morning, Becky. Nice to see you.
You too.
The economy is very interesting. We're at a very low unemployment rate, 4% essentially. We've got 3% GDP growth. And I've been doing this for 49 years, and we're probably going from the most anti-business administration to the opposite. So we do a lot of talking to CEOs and companies on the ground, and I'd say CEOs are somewhere between relieved and giddy. So we're a believer in animal spirits. Paul Ryan was on your show last week talking about a 32% increase in business confidence over the last 12 months. I think that's probably a record in terms of change. So the economy looks very, very strong, at least for the next 6 months, which is about as far out as one can see with any degree of confidence. In terms of the markets, I would say it's complicated. Despite what I just said about all the wonderful things about the economy, we have an earnings yield to bond yield, probably the most unattractive level, not probably the most unattractive level in 20 years. So you're going to have this push of a strong economy versus bond yields rising in response to that strong economy. And that kind of makes me not have a strong opinion one way or the other on the market. I will say this, in my business, every change creates change in security prices, and having this kind of radical change from one administration to the other, in addition to what's going on in the private sector with innovation, then you got deregulation from the government, disruption. I think there's going to be plenty of change and plenty for your viewers to do. I wouldn't worry about the market. I'd focus on individual stocks.
Stan, hold that thought for just one moment. We're looking at some important pictures right now.
Yeah, we're watching the motorcade now approaching the North Portico, and you see there Joe Biden and the First Lady Jill Biden standing on the red carpet under the North Portico of the White House as the motorcade pulls up with Donald and Melania Trump. And this will be a moment for the history books, Becky, as we watch the outgoing president shake hands with the incoming president of the United States. Of course, in this campaign, they campaigned against each other early on. And then at the end, it was the outgoing president's vice president who was ultimately defeated by Donald Trump. But no question that Donald Trump returning to office here is a repudiation in many ways of the Biden agenda. And Biden's self-proclaimed mission was to defeat Donald Trump and remove him from the political scene. He has failed to do that. And this moment here, as we watch this, is an encapsulation of exactly that. And we're watching handshakes all around, very cordial. Very cold out there. It looks a little windy as well as we watch the First Ladies exchange some greetings as well and now pose for a picture here on a very frigid day. And it is a beautiful picture, Becky, as you look at that, because what you're seeing there is the peaceful transfer of American power between two bitter political rivals. And despite that bitter rivalry, what we're seeing here is cordiality and an exchange of pleasantries.
Smiles and arrivals for tea.
And exactly what you want.
Exactly.
In American democracy.
So they're going inside right now. They're going to be having tea together and then will depart to head over to the Capitol for the inauguration itself. Let's get back to Stan Druckenmiller. And Stan, I'm sorry to have you wait there because I know a lot of people are really hoping to hear what you have to say about this. What you said about the prices in the markets. Let's go back to what we heard in October when you spoke at a conference and said that you were shorting U.S. Treasuries. I think it was 10 to 15% of your portfolio at that time. You still shorting Treasuries based on what you're watching?
I still have a short in Treasuries. I know a lot of people have been surprised by interest rates rising after the cut. Of course, we weren't, because I thought the Fed was making a mistake. And I was worried about the same animal spirits we've been talking about, and of course, our horrendous fiscal situation. Having said that, we've come quite a ways. I think we're probably in the 7th inning, but sometimes you can make a lot of money from the 7th inning to the 9th inning. And who knows if the Fed stimulus into a melt up in asset prices with the kind of animal spirits I talked about give you upward inflation, which is not our forecast, but we're definitely open-minded to it, and we're not expecting lower inflation. That could tip the bond market and create a problem. So we're still short Treasuries, but we're certainly not pressing the size of that position now.
You've said in a perfect world, Stan, that you're not a fan of tariffs, but that it could be potentially the lesser evil if it's done in moderation.
Yeah, I don't want to exit this interview as tariff man. In a perfect world, I would not be for a 10% tariff, but we're not in a perfect world. As you know, we have a big fiscal problem, mandatory spending, plus interest expense is literally 100% of revenues right now. And both sides of the aisle have said they are not about to cut entitlements, which is the elephant in the room. Having said that, because of that, we need pay-fors. So our main choices are an income tax and a consumption tax like tariff. So when I say tariffs are the lesser of the two evils in terms of those two, because we have a fiscal problem, we need revenues. Tariffs will generate revenues. We also have a private savings problem in this country. They're far too low. So I think a lot of economists who are out raising the alarm bells about tariffs would probably be fine with a consumption tax. To me, tariffs are simply a consumption tax that foreigners pay for some of it. Now, the risk is retaliation, but as long as we stay in the 10% range, and I think so-called fear of Donald Trump, I think the risks are overblown relative to the rewards. The rewards are on high. It's more like they're the lesser of two evils.
You know, Stan, you had said before the election that you would not be voting for Kamala Harris. You would not be voting for Donald Trump. Part of your concern was, I think, what you called bipartisan fiscal recklessness on the part of all parties. At this point, you've been very concerned about our spending levels and not getting that under control. But Scott Bessent has been tapped to be the incoming Treasury Secretary. He's someone you know well. You worked with him. He worked with you at the Soros Fund, and you've worked very closely with him. I think you know him well. How do you feel about the appointments that are being made and named when it comes to looking after the fiscal side of things, or at least when it comes to the Treasury Department, what you might anticipate?
Scott's extremely capable, big brain, very thoughtful. He's in the unique position that I don't think any other Treasury Secretary has been in, where he's been an active participant in markets. As he said in his confirmation hearing, he's been to 40 countries. I know he's been involved in markets in at least 40 countries. So he's extremely capable. He understands the fiscal situation. I think he understands that the biggest risk to this administration is both fiscal and inflation. Having said that, he's not in charge. He's extremely persuasive. He had no problem persuading me many times when we worked together, but I just don't know how it's going to work out. This is a huge, huge problem he inherits. The deficit is currently at 6.7% of GDP. It's $1.9 trillion. The last time we were at full employment was 2017. It was 3.4% of GDP. We also have peace. So we have a president who in the campaign said he's going to not have taxes on tips, not have taxes on Social Security. So there's a lot of things going on. There's some hope on DOGE. I've heard the optimistic assessments. I hope they're true. I'm too old and too cynical to really see a lot of that stuff happening. If they could cut 200 or 300 trillion out, That'd be great. If we could get, say, $1 trillion or more over the next 10 years out of tariffs, that would help. But we're just in a mess because interest expense is just a huge, huge growing elephant. And it's above defense spending. It's now above non-mandatory discretionary spending. So unless we get this under control, the eighth wonder of the world, power of compounding with interest expense, is just going to continue to cause upward pressure.
Having said all that, you also wanted to make clear to the viewers that even with all of your concerns, you're not necessarily pessimistic on the markets. You're pretty optimistic about things like innovation. You've been a big believer and big buyer of AI stocks, even though you sold out of NVIDIA, and based on the most recent filings, it looks like you sold out of Microsoft too. But you are still a believer in AI. You're still a believer in innovation, correct?
I am, and I think we have a 2 to 3 year infrastructure build out, and we're in the process of that, and there's going to be a lot of benefits from AI. I believe we will have artificial general intelligence by 2035. So I think the payoff down the road is huge. But again, I think given where valuations are, we're the kind of firm that doesn't have to be fully invested. We're not, but we have a lot of equities in our portfolio, both long and short, because all the change we anticipate.
But you're looking at what in AI? If you sold out of names like NVIDIA and Microsoft, those were, you know, the top of the pyramid, I suppose. Where do you see the benefits in AI that make sense from a market perspective?
Becky, I'd say at the application layer, we don't know about the modelers. They obviously have huge capital spending. I'm talking about the hyperscalers now. And that capital spending may or may not pay off on a return on investment. It's unclear. But there's so many companies that we've seen where AI is going to be able to lower their costs and drive productivity. And there are application layers within healthcare. There are application layers all over the place. You don't have to necessarily invest what you would think of an AI company, as opposed to companies that are going to apply AI to the rest of the rest of their business. So that's where we're looking. A lot of them we haven't even thought of yet. I don't think during the internet you would have dreamed up Uber or Facebook or any of those names. We think it'll be the same thing with AI. The application is probably limitless, and all I'm saying is we're open-minded to that.
Stan, it's Eamon Javers here, and a moment ago you said that you don't see inflation coming down during the course of this year. And of course, the tension here is that was the central premise of the Trump campaign, right? Was that he was going to be the guy who's going to get egg prices down, who's going to get inflation under control, and that Biden was a failure for allowing the inflation to get out of control. I wonder if you think two things. One is if there's anything that President-elect Trump can do to get inflation under control in the first 6 months or so of his term. And then two, what you think of the risks from the bond market. You know, there's that famous saying that the bond market is one of the most powerful forces in politics. Where do you think the bond market guardrails might come into play on this administration? So two questions for you.
On the inflation, I think that's primarily the Fed's job. I'm not encouraged with that they've cut 100 basis points the last 2 to 3 months. We had a saying when I lived in Pittsburgh, which I guess is a national saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I really don't understand why they're taking the risk of lowering interest rates here with inflation still above target and the animal spirits I described. So that's the risk there. But as long as the Fed is responsible, I could see it coming down. But, Jav and I have an open mind on how that one plays off. What was the second part of the question?
The second question is on the bond market. And at what point does the Trump administration start to face constraints from the bond market in terms of what you're seeing with tariffs, inflation, and all the rest of it? At some point, does the bond market start to constrain Trump's options?
I think that's a risk. It's not a forecast, but the history, and again, I've been in this business too long, maybe I'm a cynic, is Congress and the administration don't act until you have some kind of a crisis. So I would assume that that kind of pressure could be forthcoming in the next 4 years. I just don't see the politicians on both sides of the aisle willing to do the kind of stuff you need to do, which tends to be radical, in particular, rein in entitlements. And at these prices, they will rein them in if we get in a financial crisis. That's the history. So that's the risk, that we need the bond market to send a signal. And it's one of the disappointing things I've seen about Fed policy. They've accommodated all this trillions of dollars in spending that's gone on the last 4 or 5 years. And we're not in a COVID emergency situation anymore. We're in peace. We have full employment. It's time to get our act together.
Stan, we're going to let you go in just a second, but you are somebody who's made a lot of money in trading currencies in the past. Do you have any predictions on the dollar over the next several years?
Next several years is beyond my purview because of all the complications we've been talking about, Becky. But for now, I would think the tariffs, which I think are coming despite the optimism in this morning's Wall Street Journal story, should put upward pressure on the dollar. The fact that we have animal spirits and Europe has sort of dead spirits should put upward pressure on the dollar. So sort of like fixed income, I think we're in late innings, probably the 7th inning, but sometimes you make a lot of money toward the end. But I think the dollar is okay for now, and we'll see long term depending on how a lot of this other things we've already discussed play out.
Stan Druckenmiller. Stan, thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Becky.
Take care. All right, still to come this morning, we will speak to Business Roundtable CEO Josh Bolten on what corporate America would like to see from President-elect Trump. And then investor, philanthropist, and co-founder of the Carlyle Group, David Rubenstein, will join us. Plus, former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb on his experience in the first Trump administration and much more. Our special coverage of the inauguration of Donald J. Trump as 47th president will continue. Right there, we've been looking at pictures of what's happening inside the rotunda, the small gathering of guests there.
It's a very tight space in the Capitol Rotunda. It's a big space, but given the guest list that they had outside, they're going to have to trim it way down inside, and we'll look to see who makes the cut, who's in the room.
That is a very tough ticket to get. We'll have more of our special coverage right after this break.
And welcome back to CNBC's special coverage of the inauguration of Donald Trump as we take a live look now inside the rotunda where the seats are set and the expectation is running high. I'm Eamon Javers as we wait for Becky Quick, who's up on the roof right now with Megan Costa getting ready for additional coverage. And we're at this moment a little bit behind in the schedule as we look at the program for the day. The president-elect and the first lady are at the White House with the Bidens. They are having tea. No cameras in the room for that moment at the White House, but we do expect to see the Trumps and the Bidens depart the White House for the Capitol. That was scheduled for 10:25 a.m. this morning, and there you see the west front of the Capitol, all dressed up for Inauguration Day. We're running a little bit behind here in terms of the schedule, maybe about a half an hour earlier in terms of how far behind we were, but we'll wait and see if they can make up some of the difference here and when that motorcade gets underway as we wait to see that fascinating moment between these two leaders, the outgoing Biden team, the incoming Trump team, both of them issuing dueling sets of executive orders and dueling sets we expect of pardons today as we watch some of the guests making their way into the rotunda. One of the fascinating things to watch here as we watch the dignitaries and VIPs make their way in is who actually made the cut for invitations into the rotunda. Remember, the rotunda is a big space. You can fit the entire Statue of Liberty from toe to the tip of the torch inside the Capitol Rotunda, and yet it is a much smaller space than that west front where we expected to see this inauguration take place, but for the weather. And so who got the coveted tickets inside the rotunda has been a big game of speculation here in Washington, D.C. Over the weekend as people scrambled to call in all possible favors to get inside the room where it happened. And Becky, you're up on the roof now of our building here, just overlooking this scene, and I'll turn it back over to you.
It's cold up here, Eamon. I think they made the right decision to move things in. Should have seen the stairs getting up here, too. That is a trip and a half, so to speak. Eamon, thank you. Megan Costa is here on the roof with me. You've been putting in the long hours up here. Oh, my gosh. I'm going to bring you some warm hot chocolate and some coffee after this. It is currently 27 degrees, but with the wind up here, it feels a lot colder. It is a beautiful sunny day, though, and there's so much that's happening here. Megan, what have you been learning? What have you been talking about? What have you been finding out?
We've been learning a whole lot. It actually is quite a substantive day. And I will say it's about 24, 25 degrees up here. I think a little warmer than they expected. But if we get another one of these gusts of winds while you're up here, those are coming about 22 miles an hour.
I almost blew off the stairs coming up here. I wouldn't even call them stairs. The scaffolding that we've put up. Look, it's a beautiful scene at the Capitol, but I understand why they moved the ceremonies inside.
Yes.
Would have been a lot for people to sit outside for 6-7 hours.
Absolutely. It's not quite the 7 degrees it was during Reagan's second when they moved that one inside, but it's still, it would have been a very long ceremony. But there is a lot going on, like you mentioned. So we just got a couple of calls, briefings from the incoming White House administration to get the first real set of substantive policy ideas. And what I'll tell you is that 10 of these actions are on the border. 3 of them are about the economy. 2 of them are about sort of government reform, DEI initiatives. So clearly focusing, as Trump has throughout all of his tenure, all of his years in public office, on immigration, things like ending catch and release, reinstating Remain in Mexico, committing to finish that border wall and things like that. And so that's really where the focus is. And I will say this is going to come as sort of a breath of fresh air, as a good thing for a big part of his base, that over those Christmas holidays when we were having debates over H-1B, you'll remember, they were worried Trump was backing off of this. With this new slate of actions, declaring a national border emergency, for example, sending troops to the border, this is what they wanted to see.
You know, there's a lot of talk, at least that's what we've been hearing today, and talking through with Democrats, but also some Republicans who say the big issue is going to be is how you tackle immigration and the border, which was one of the major reasons that Trump was elected. The second, though, was unhappiness with inflation, and trying to tackle both of those at the same time can get a little tricky. Have they announced any specifics on plans on how they try to get around that, or is that something we're going to find out in the coming days?
I think that's what we have to find out. They have not really been acknowledging how if you restrict immigration as drastically as they're saying they're going to, that wages are going to have to go up, labor shortages might come back, especially in specific fields like agriculture. That's, of course, relating to grocery prices. So they haven't talked about that. They did have some language about wanting to sign a memo saying that they will be bringing inflation back down, but no specifics there. And they know, and you know better than anybody, that there's not much that they can do, especially not on day one in office, with an executive order. So it's a wait and see.
Yeah, there are, you mentioned agriculture, and that's where it's, I think something like 12% of the workers in that arena in particular. If you're looking at farms and produce and things, it's more closer to 40%. In some states, even higher for dairy farms. And we'll be watching some of those issues too. And I think we do have some arrivals coming at the Capitol. Eamon, is that what you're seeing?
We're just seeing Tim Cook. You can see with the white hair there, just going into the entrance to the Capitol building. This is on ground level here, and we're watching to see some of the other executives who might be arriving alongside him. And we're seeing backs of heads here, so a little bit tricky. There's Jeff Bezos. Mark Zuckerberg with the curly hair, Jeff Bezos with the, we'll call it short haircut, going into the Capitol building. All these tech executives lining up to show their support and enthusiasm for this new administration. And a fascinating moment, Becky, as we were just talking about, you know, we just really haven't seen CEOs to this degree at an American inauguration. We've seen them in ones and twos over the centuries, but we haven't seen a phalanx of CEOs alongside an inauguration like we're going to see today as you watch Bezos there disappear into the, I believe that's the carriage entrance on the east front of the Capitol.
Yeah, Eamon, I will say, I'm sorry, it's a little loud here because there's helicopters that are overhead, a lot of security. I've been hearing these helicopters since last night. They've been basically hovering the entire time. What I will say, though, is people look at this from two different perspectives. The outgoing president, President Biden, had some comments in his final address to the nation where he warned about the tech oligarchy, warned about concerns of some of those things being having too much of the government power handed over to that. And by the way, there's former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, both on their way into the Capitol building as well. You will see this display of former presidents who have come together for this. Former President Barack Obama is expected to be here. It has been confirmed that he'll be here. Also, you have former presidents George W. Bush, who will be here as well. But back to this story of the relationship between the CEOs and the incoming Trump administration. Some will point to this, like former President Biden, or the current President Biden did, about the concerns with these. You'll have other people who will say, look, these are the most successful, innovative people in the country, and you want them there at the forefront. Former New Hampshire Governor Chris Coons just pointing it out that it would be great to see how you move things more quickly for the country, how you move things for the people who, for the companies who are the biggest employers of U.S. workers, and to make sure that you streamline some of those processes. So
yeah, again, and Becky, you heard.
Go ahead, Eamon.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you heard from some of the folks we've talked to this morning, this complaint about the Biden administration really not being friendly to business, not having an open door policy, and such a contrast here with Donald Trump having an open door, open inauguration policy to business executives. And, you know, the reason I think Biden was not perceived as open to business as he might have been was because Biden was very focused on being a pro-labor president. Being close to the unions was deeply important to Biden. He's the first president to go out and walk a picket line while serving as president of the United States, and keeping close to the unions so important to him. We'll see now under Maga, because the union vote is so important to Donald Trump as well. And I know there are a lot of economic populists on the conservative side, Becky, who want this administration also to be close to the unions, to be close to the ability for workers to make more money and benefit in their own communities from some of the wealth that this country generates. So we'll watch that tension as well. You want to be close to the CEOs, but this is an administration that very much wants to be a worker-focused administration, a blue-collar administration, and so we'll watch that tension play out today.
Donald Trump has been someone who's been able to do both of these issues. I think we're looking at some pictures right now. Is that Vivek Ramaswamy, who is also at the Capitol Rotunda? And what's the word you're getting right now?
Well,
that he is officially leaving Doge. There's been some commentary about that before, some speculation about that, but he is officially leaving Doge. We've heard that he's going to be running for governor of Ohio, and that would be something that he'd be picking up with very quickly. Again, these are the few who have made it into the Rotunda. It's a much smaller space, and we will continue to watch this and our coverage of what's happening here at the inauguration. Maga Casella gets extra bonus points for her duty up here on the rooftop today, where it's very, very cold. And I will bring you some hot chocolate in just a little bit. When we return, we have much more from Washington as we count down to the inauguration of President-elect Donald J. Trump. That's coming right after this break. Also, we'll be speaking with Business Roundtable CEO Josh Bolten. He's going to join us on the business climate across the country. And then later this hour, a special interview with the Carlyle Group's David Rubenstein. Stay tuned. CNBC's special coverage. We'll be right back.
And welcome back to CNBC's special coverage. I'm Eamon Javers in Washington. Some of the biggest business leaders in America are here in Washington today for Donald Trump's inauguration, many hoping for a lighter regulatory touch from the government compared to what we've seen over the last 4 years. And Steve Liesman joins us now to talk more about the deregulatory agenda. Steve, where do you think President Trump is expected to focus his deregulatory efforts, and who do you see as the potential winners?
Well, first of all, Eamon, it might be worth underscoring what you just said. Among the things that Wall Street is so excited about, it is deregulation, maybe as much or more so, or at least in second place when it comes to tax cuts. So when you look at the industries and what we hear from the Trump administration, the incoming administration, energy looks like it's going to be first on the list, with the president-elect right now and soon to be president undoing some of the restrictions on offshore drilling. Finance is a big area where, as you know, the vice chair for supervision at the Federal Reserve has tendered his resignation. So that's a big area where we expect some relief when it comes to capital requirements. There is, of course, crypto, which may get a lighter touch than it would have gotten or had gotten under the Biden administration. Telecom and M&A is interesting. You've had an administration right now that has been sort of against anything becoming bigger. That is going to be something that probably goes away, though there will probably be some remaining concern about the idea of mergers and the impact of prices on individuals. But also, Eamon, you might get some restrictions on foreign purchases of U.S. companies.
Steve, I can tell you, I was just on a conference call with the incoming administration's team. They're talking about some of these executive orders we're going to see today. A lot of what you've just been talking about in terms of the deregulatory agenda. They're talking about an end to what they call the EV mandate for electric vehicles. Right. And they're also going to have some interesting executive orders today on efforts to what they call efforts to curtail consumer choice on things like shower heads, gas stoves, washing machines, and the like. You know, you heard a lot of this from Donald Trump on the campaign trail about how he just doesn't like government meddling in some of the basic things that we all use in our bathrooms, our shower heads, water pressure, all that stuff. Those are the kind of little things that just kind of bug people about government overreach. And I think they're going to take some steps on that today.
That's all well and good, Eamon, but I've spent a couple of weeks now studying regulation and deregulation. And what I can tell you is deregulation is hard. It's almost as hard as regulating. And there are actually several dozens of rules that govern regulations. There are agencies that oversee regulations. It's worth pointing out that a couple studies I've read, Eamon, found that the first Trump administration lost 80% of the court cases against their deregulation in the first term. They may come back smarter and wiser in their approach, but it isn't just the stroke of a pen that allows a president to deregulate. So it might be worth Wall Street tempering at least some of its enthusiasm. Yes, this is a very different administration with a different attitude towards regulation and business. You look at these surveys that are out there, Eamon, and it's like business is acting like the foot has been taken off the neck of business, and they're feeling very optimistic, but the process is slow and cumbersome. And everything I've heard from regulatory experts, Eamon, is that the best deregulation happens with Congress, not by the stroke of the presidential pen.
It is fascinating, Steve. There is still the courts to consider. There will be some pen stroking today, nonetheless, even though you say it's not just about the stroke of a pen. And Steve, thank you for that. Becky Quick, you've made it back inside from the Arctic conditions outside.
Eamon,
Welcome
all I
back.
can tell you is that we are so lucky that we made the decision to come inside rather than outside. I almost got blown off the roof.
Nice and toasty in here.
It is.
Yeah, and look at these folks going into the rotunda. They are nice and toasty as well. I bet
and
they
it's a
are
beautiful
thrilled
setting.
that they're not sitting
It makes
outside.
it much more complicated for the 250,000 people who received tickets who were here planning to come to this, but it is pretty beautiful. And you have to appreciate the pageantry as well.
You know, I tell you, I was on the Metro very early this morning on the way in. Lots of folks with MAGA hats, lots of folks in Trump gear on the Metro very early this morning. And a lot of those
yesterday
people.
At Union Station.
And yesterday, absolutely. And a lot of those people, you know, sadly are left kind of out in the cold, literally here, because they came to see a big Washington spectacle and they won't be able to be inside the rotunda. So you feel for those folks who travel from out of state for this.
Arena and some of the associated things that are there with this. And by the way, the general atmosphere that you've seen in the town when you have anybody from either side that comes together. And this is certainly an example of that.
It was a big party weekend.
It is. It is. Joining us right now for more on the outlook for business during a second Donald Trump term is the Business Roundtable CEO, Josh Bolten. And Josh, it is great to have you here.
Good morning, and thank you for having me in the toasty studio.
Yes, we're all lucky, I'm telling you, having just gone up for a few minutes. Josh, Steve was just talking about that business enthusiasm. Stan Druckenmiller said the executives that he talks to on the ground, he said, I think they have been from relief to giddy in terms of what they're watching. Oh, hold this thought.
Walking out to this is the North Portico.
The first ladies who are now.
The first ladies emerging with an escort there.
Jill Biden and Melania Trump, who are walking down the steps for their escort on this.
And they will be riding together in the same motorcade on the way to the Capitol for the swearing in. You know, a fascinating study in contrast there.
Maybe a little less awkward than some of the things we've seen recently at the funeral for President Carter, former President Carter.
We'll see. I mean, so much attention is going to be focused on the body language between these two folks. Dr. Jill Biden, of course, one of the president's biggest supporters, encouraged the president to run for re-election. That's being seen as a mistake by most of the folks in the Democratic Party today, riding with Melania Trump, who is now coming back to Washington. Dr. Jill Biden, somebody very enthusiastic about participating in Washington, participating in the White House activities. Melania Trump not seen as somebody who is eager to be a public face of the administration, eager to be out front on all these issues. As we watch the second limo pull up, there are two beasts today rolling.
The beast is the official terminology for these
for the giant
motorcade.
White House limos. These things are, when you stand next to these limos, I mean, it's about 6 feet tall. I mean, it looks like a limousine from the outside, but that thing is a tank. And apparently very luxurious inside. I've never been invited, but it is.
Me neither.
It is something to see when you stand next to them.
All right, we are awaiting President-elect Donald Trump, along with existing President Joe Biden. They're going to be riding over together in this motorcade as well. And as you mentioned, sometimes some tensions for people who have been competitors, staunch competitors. At other times, though, you did see President Biden bring incoming President Trump to the White House even after the election, and it looked like they had some fairly jovial times.
Yeah, there were smiles, there were handshakes. I mean, there was a real respect between the two on some level, at least. And you do get the sense that people who have been president of the United States have shared this incredible burden, understand what it's like to be in the Oval Office at the end of the day, being the person who has to make the decisions. That's something they share, even though they don't share much else. As we watch the military aides here now emerging, we expect to see the presidents here.
And, okay, this is J.D. Vance, the vice president-elect, who's coming out right now, along with the existing vice president, Kamala Harris. Again, tensions when you have competitors who have gone up against each other, but riding over in the peaceful transfer of power that this nation has come to symbolize, that peaceful transfer of power.
And that is such an important thing on a day like today as you watch J.D. Vance walk around. You wonder what he's thinking today, Becky.
He assisted her into the limo as well, too.
He is, he's a United States senator becoming vice president. This is a big change of perspective, not just from the Capitol building to the White House, but in terms of all of the pomp and circumstance that goes along with the presidency, riding in these limos. This is not something that a senator gets to do. It is something that a vice president gets to do, and we'll see how he adapts.
Josh Bolten, who's the Business Roundtable president and CEO, also a former White House chief of staff under George W. Bush. You've watched these. You've participated in these transfers of powers, too, Josh.
I've been at both ends of it, incoming and outgoing.
Which is better?
Incoming's got to be better, but I found outgoing more compelling as a more compelling demonstration of the genius of our system. Wow. Is that you're as a chief of staff, I was adjacent to the most powerful people in the world up until noon on January 20th, and all of a sudden you're out and you're just a regular citizen. And that is a fabulous thing about our system.
And you get your life back, which is probably pretty fabulous,
Not
too.
so bad also.
Yeah. Again, we are awaiting at this point the president-elect, Donald J. Trump, along with President Joe Biden, who will be riding over together as well.
Josh, what can you tell us about these moments behind the scenes? You know, somebody who's been there. What's going on behind that set of closed doors right now? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, I mean, I've like I said, I've been to that T, both incoming and outgoing, and it's for the most part, a pretty warm scene because in this case, the incoming knows what the drill is. He knows what's happening. But he's taken over the house that the Bidens have lived in for 4 years. It's been their residence, and all of a sudden it's his. And all of the responsibilities shift over in just 90 minutes.
Bidens woke up in the bed in the White House residence.
Yep.
Their stuff has now been packed up.
Yeah,
It'll be shipped off.
I was wondering about that.
And Donald Trump will sleep there tonight.
Yep.
They've been packing up for weeks, I guess.
Yeah, they've probably been packing for a long time, but you've left a house. I mean,
it's hard.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to do.
A little smaller than this.
Yeah.
I bet I have more stuff than they do in mine.
More clutter.
Yeah.
And I think they're really, even among the most bitter political rivals, and Presidents Biden and Trump have to be counted as among our more bitter political rivals in our modern history. Even among them, there's a bond of experience and I think respect that makes that tea that they're just coming out from a pretty warm experience.
How do you think this changes given that Donald Trump is not a rookie, right? Donald Trump is somebody who has been president before. We haven't seen this in a long time for a former president to come back and be sworn in for a second term, non-consecutive like that. Those T's are often between an outgoing president and an incoming rookie who's never done the job before. This time around, it's two presidents who are more on an equal footing, and there's less need for Joe Biden to give Trump advice on how to operate the executive branch or anything like that. So how does that change the dynamic here?
Yeah, it's got to be a very different dynamic. Trump being the first since Grover Cleveland to have non-consecutive terms. But I think a lot of the basics remain, that they are handing over the reins not just of power but of responsibility I think both men have to feel a sense of awe at this moment.
We see them coming out now. A bit of a delay from the vice presidents and the first ladies, but now we see both presidents of the United States emerging onto the North Portico. A salute there from the military aides. No words exchanged, Becky, that I can see between Trump and Biden as Biden goes in the near door and Trump goes around to the other side of the beast. Both of them familiar with the vehicle, familiar with the presidency, and both of them will be riding side by side. And to be a fly on the wall inside that limo for this ride.
And again, that inauguration, the transfer of power, officially taking place in less than 90 minutes. You're now talking about 10:37 a.m. That's due to set place at noon Eastern time. So we will continue to watch these pictures. Josh, let's talk about what we brought you here to talk about, and that would be the business confidence levels that you've seen at the Business Roundtable. Steve was talking about this. Stan Druckenmiller pointed to us earlier and said the executives he's spoken with have been anything from relieved to giddy. Your own survey has found that confidence jumped about 12 points in the last survey you took. What can you tell us about the numbers and digging down, what you're hearing?
Yeah, I wouldn't go to giddy for most of the membership, but there is a high degree of confidence in the U.S. economy, and there's optimism about what a Trump administration might mean for the policy, the economic policies that really have a dramatic effect on the ability of our CEOs to do business in this country. And I think Steve Liesman is right to focus on regulation because I think that's where the biggest changes may come most quickly.
Regulation may be the things we see most quickly, but it's the counterfactual that may be the most important. Scott Bessent, when he was testifying before Congress, said that he thinks the extension of the 2017 tax cuts is the most important. And I know that that ranks very highly with your membership as well.
At the top of the list for our membership. And Becky, you're right to raise the counterfactual, because if we were watching the inauguration of a President Harris right now, the entire business community in the United States would be facing the prospect of a dramatic tax increase. And that would have been very damaging to business confidence, to the prospects for a flourishing economy. So I think incoming Secretary Bessent is right to say that's the biggest difference for business between a Trump administration and a Harris administration.
We spoke with Albert Bourla earlier, the CEO of Pfizer, and he was fairly plain-spoken, maybe more than you would traditionally hear from a CEO who might be on camera with things, saying that he thought the outgoing administration was, while there were people who they were working with on a lot of issues, that the administration was pushed too far to the left, was listening too far to what the left was saying, and that they were downright unfriendly to business at times. He says that there are risks associated with the incoming administration, whether that be tariffs, whether that be changes in healthcare that might be coming through, but he thinks that the risks are outweighed by the potential for innovation and radical change. What do you hear from your broader membership?
From the broader membership, something similar. Now, Albert, who's a great participating member of the Business Roundtable, comes from the pharmaceutical industry, which was particularly in the crosshairs of the Biden administration. So his experience will have been more extreme than most of our membership. But having said that, most of our membership experienced in some direct, tangible way an anti-business attitude from the Biden administration, which is going out of the window with an incoming Trump administration. There are risks with a Trump administration that you've talked about, but overall, our membership, I think, has to be counted as optimistic about the opportunities that are coming.
We've spoken a lot about the tech CEOs who are here, how they've been front and center, and how they will be in the rotunda for some of these things too. But we were looking at pictures earlier today that included CEOs from a much broader perspective. People like Doug McMillon, the CEO of Walmart, which by the way, is the nation's largest employer outside of the federal government.
Right.
He was there at the church services, is going to be at the inauguration. It was a former leader of the Business Roundtable.
One of our former chairs.
Former chair of the Business Roundtable. And I just wonder, I mean, this is more than just technology, I think, is the point.
Oh, yeah,
this.
way beyond technology. I mean, as I was watching your feed of the people going into the rotunda, it looked like it could have been a meeting of the Business Roundtable for a few moments there. So it's across the board, and our membership knows that this president likes to deal personally with people. He considers the CEOs of big American companies to be his peers. And there's some mutual respect there, and so they're showing up to show their support. They're not on board necessarily with everything that the Trump administration is likely to announce or will do during the 4 years, but they are looking forward to having a serious dialogue, and where they think things are going off the rails, having the quality of communication that makes it possible to try to straighten things out.
I expect we'll be hearing much more from you and the membership as we get into this. What are the first meetings? Do you have conversations so far with the administration at this point?
You know, they've been unusually disciplined. Unlike 8 years ago, the administration folks, especially those who are subject to confirmation, have been unusually disciplined about, no, we're not doing meetings, we're not doing public events, which, by the way, I think is the right approach for somebody going up for confirmation. But we are looking forward to having a good level of communication back and forth with the Trump administration. And they're, especially in the economic area, we know that there are some very high-quality people going into senior positions who hopefully will be able to steer this country through a very difficult international and global economic environment. I mean, there's optimism in the air here in Washington today, but we should not forget that it's a really tough world these days in which to compete and be successful.
Josh Bolten, who is the CEO of the Business Roundtable, the president and CEO, also the former White House chief of staff for George W. Bush. Josh, it's great to see you today.
Thank you.
Thank
Becky,
you.
if I could just interrupt with one little piece of news here as we watch the arrival here and the motorcade getting ready to show up here at the Capitol building. Some changes already on the Trump team. Just confirmed over text with a source familiar with the situation as we're sitting here that Vivek Ramaswamy will be leaving the DOJ committee. He is going to be running for governor of Ohio. An interesting political campaign for him. It was impossible to do both jobs at once. A source familiar with the situation tells me, and so Vivek, who was alongside Elon Musk in that effort initially, is now out at DOJ into the Ohio governor's race, and he will be announcing that run, Becky, according to a source familiar with the situation next week.
Interesting when you think about how many jobs Elon Musk has as
right, he just got another
singular head of DOJ and the other companies that he's juggling too. Our next guest is joining us right now to weigh in on economic expectations for the next 4 years, the investment landscape, and much more. We want to welcome Carlyle Group's co-founder and co-chairman, David Rubenstein. He's also the author of The Highest Calling, Conversations on the American Presidency, for which he interviewed President-elect Donald Trump. And David, it's always great to see us. He's joining us this morning from the snowy mountains of Davos. David, you're a Washington native. You're somebody who has worked in previous administrations, who's been here in Washington and understands the transition of power. What can you tell us about this historic moment today?
Well, it's always better, in my view, to be going in than going out, though I recognize what Josh said is if you work for 4 years in administration, it's not bad to get some time off. What we're seeing now is a good thing to see because sometimes presidents who are coming in don't really want to talk to or meet with the president who is going out. For example, when Eisenhower came in, he didn't get out of the car. He picked up Truman at the White House, and they went down Pennsylvania Avenue and never talked to each other. Roosevelt, for disability reasons, didn't want to get out of the car, and he didn't when he was transitioning with Herbert Hoover. And they didn't talk apparently at all either.
So sometimes the president don't even talk when they're going up there. But I think the conversation is probably going to be civil. These men have been around for a while. They're both professional. One point I would add, though, we've never really had something like this since 1892, as Josh Bolton pointed out. And we'll find out whether a new administration with fresh people can do a second term for a president better than somebody who is doing a second term consecutively. When you do a second term consecutively, you have people who are tired and they might not be as great in the second term. And that's why some second terms haven't worked out as well. And also you get some fresh people coming in a second term who are rookies and don't have any experience with the president. So for some reason, second terms haven't been as good as first terms. Maybe if you have a non-consecutive second term, it could be different and better. And Grover Cleveland actually had a pretty good non-consecutive second term.
You know, you've made the point of presidents who haven't met with the transitions. And of course, Donald Trump was not at the inauguration 4 years ago. But I went back and looked it up. The first time that you didn't have a current sitting president at the inauguration of his successor was going all the way back to John Adams not showing up for Thomas Jefferson's inauguration. Obviously, they were bitter rivals. They ended up mending fences maybe the last 11 years of their lives, actually became much closer, writing letters back and forth. And they died on the same day, July 4th of 1826, almost 200 years ago.
So what happened was very unusual. In those days, the president and the vice president didn't have to be in the same party. And so Jefferson was elected as vice president, though he was a different party than Adams. And he really, I think, upset Adams by running against him for president. He beat him. And so Adams, on 4:30 in the morning, got a stagecoach to take him out of town. And Jefferson walked by himself with no guards or anything from his boarding house to be sworn in. Very different than today.
Yeah. David, let's transition back to business and what business can expect. Obviously, you talk to a lot of CEOs. You see where money is flowing with private equity and what's happening. What are you thinking, just from your perspective, in terms of where the business environment stands and what the markets look like?
There's no doubt that the large part of the business community is fairly euphoric, if I can use that word. I think they are feeling that they're going to get a better shake, rightly or wrongly, under President Trump, and they're familiar with him and many of his people. So I think the business community, particularly the Wall Street community, is pretty happy with this change. Obviously, there's some people who are big supporters in Wall Street of Kamala Harris, but I think as a general rule, I think the business community is thinking that they're going to be okay.
David, I'll just tell you, we're looking at pictures. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're looking at pictures right now of Donald Trump and Joe Biden entering. And by the way, it looks like they're talking, making small talk. So it probably wasn't as awkward a ride as you mentioned some past presidents might have had, where they didn't talk to each other.
Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota riding over with them in the limo.
And it looks like Chuck Schumer is right behind them.
Chuck Schumer there,
and Kamala Harris.
I believe J.D. Vance will be there as well, as they make their way in through the carriage entrance of the Capitol building and now up to a couple of levels to where the rotunda is. Fascinating, Becky, to watch this play out as we watch these two men, both with great political gifts, maybe different political gifts, and both of them now
Sundar Pichai, Elon Musk already inside the rotunda, making small talk, and it looks like they're enjoying themselves as well. Background, you hear some of the music that's already playing, God Bless America. There's Melania Trump being escorted in to the rotunda. And yes, we continue with the dignitaries. There's Doug Emhoff. So the dignitaries are making their way in. It's hard to do when the monitors are across the room.
And this is a very tight corridor on the first level of the Capitol building. There's J.D. Vance and his wife as they make their way in. Again, as we talk about them, very different moment for them on the national stage. J.D. Vance obviously has been a prominent author. He's been a senator. He's been in the military. But he is somebody who is now ascending to a level that is very different perspective than just being a United States senator. And of course, somebody who may stand to be the heir apparent to the MAGA movement. Donald Trump in this non-consecutive second term entering office, almost automatically a lame duck, although he has a lot of political running room to start with. All eyes will eventually start to turn to who it is who inherits Donald Trump's mandate as the leader of MAGA, and J.D. Vance is as well positioned as anybody. Maybe him and Elon Musk might be the two people you might say might inherit the MAGA movement.
David, and by the way, there's John Paulson standing on this. David, you were saying about the business, the business levels of enthusiasm.
Amy Klobuchar is the head of the Congressional Committee on Inauguration. That's why she's riding up there with the presidents. Probably pretty nice to be there with the two presidents, but that's why she was given that assignment.
So back to what your perspective is, not just on business confidence, but also on the markets at this point, what you think might be anticipated. And I'm asking this because we spoke with Stan Druckenmiller, who thinks that the economy is going to be in great shape, at least for the next 6 months, which is about as far as we can see. But he pointed out that valuations are also at very high levels. And by the way, there's Howard Lutnick, the proposed candidate for Commerce Secretary.
Yes. Look, everybody seems to think the economy is in pretty good shape, and I think it is. People seem to think the markets are in reasonable shape, and I think that's true too. But you generally find in life, when everybody thinks something's going to happen, something else happens. So the United States economy is doing well, but when everybody tells you the economy can only go one way and the stock market can only go one way, sometimes it doesn't go that way. So I'm obviously want the stock market to go up. I want the economy to do well. But, there's going to be zigs and zags along the way, and there's no one president, no one party can control the economy.
So what are you doing protectively to zig when everybody else is zagging, David?
Well, I'm not in the shorting business, but I generally think that private equity firms feel that there's going to be a fair amount of opportunity for IPOs this year and a fair amount of opportunity for M&A transactions. I think there's been, I'd say, not as many IPOs in recent years or large M&A transactions as one might have hoped if you're in my business. But I think that people have expectations to probably be less regulatory constraints, and I think the economy should be pretty good. So people are pretty optimistic about it, and I think that people in Wall Street are thinking they're going to have record years. Well, time will tell.
We're continuing to look at some of these pictures. RFK Jr. standing next to Sundar Pichai, standing next to Howard Lutnick. There's Doug Burgum, who's standing next to them. So, dignitaries all the way around.
Fascinating moment to watch all these folks. Standing room only, literally. Yeah. And there's Vivek Ramaswamy, who, as we just reported, and Politico reported earlier today, is leaving DOJ to concentrate on his run for Ohio governor. And all of the Trump cabinet members there in the room, some dignitaries, some CEOs, sprinkling of billionaires. It's quite a scene.
I want to thank David Rubenstein for joining us from Davos, which is the other huge gathering this week. David?
You see a foreign businessman there as well, Bernard Arnault.
Oh, yes. Good eyes, eagle eyes, David, as we continue to watch this coming in.
We need David on set here with us to spot.
David Rubenstein. And David, you're preparing for Davos. What's the theme at Davos this week?
The theme generally is that the global economy is in pretty good shape. It's a chance to renew opportunities that people haven't been able to pursue for a while. But I think it's pretty optimistic. This is the 55th year of Davos. When you think about it, it's a pretty long time. And Klaus Schwab, who created it, is here in his 55th year. So there's a lot of people going to be showing up. A lot of people who are now on your television screen in the Capitol probably are going to be flying over here tonight.
David Rubenstein, co-founder of the Carlyle Group. David, we always appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this special bonus episode of Squawk Pod for the inauguration of Donald J. Trump. We're back tomorrow with coverage from the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, where the world's leaders in business, politics, philanthropy convene in the Alps. Squawk Box is hosted by Joe Kernan, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin every weekday for 3 full hours. But if you want the highlights in about 30 minutes usually, you can find them here if you follow Squawk Pod wherever you listen to podcasts. Have a great day.